You are not allowed in, the security guard mumbled, avoiding my eyes as I swiped my keycard. Before I could ask what was going on, the CEO's wife stepped forward, her lips twisted into a cruel smirk. You were just a stepping stone for my daughter, she announced loudly enough for the entire morning rush to hear. I said nothing. I just smiled, handed over my badge, got in my car, and drove away. Less than 24 hours later, their million-dollar client list evaporated, and my phone would not stop ringing. My name is Cassidy. I am 33 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I was the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Vanguard Media. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever built an empire only to have someone try to steal your crown. For 5 grueling years, I poured my absolute soul into Vanguard Media. I worked 80-hour weeks, skipped vacations, and sacrificed my personal life to build their tech portfolio from scratch. When I started, Vanguard was a sinking ship, bleeding money and losing relevance. I pitched, negotiated, and secured contracts with the 5 largest tech conglomerates in the country, transforming a dying agency into an industry titan. My reward for saving their family business was being discarded like trash on a Tuesday morning. The day began like any other. I woke up at 5, went for a run along Lake Michigan, and headed downtown. I had a massive quarterly review scheduled with Gideon, a tech billionaire representing 60% of Vanguard's revenue stream. I had spent the weekend polishing the presentation, ensuring every metric was flawless. I walked into the glass-paneled lobby of our building, mentally running through my talking points. The lobby was buzzing with morning energy, filled with executives and interns rushing to the elevators. I approached the turnstiles, gave a nod to the guard, and tapped my keycard. Instead of the familiar green light and soft chime, the scanner flashed a harsh red. Access denied. I frowned, assuming it was a simple glitch, and tapped it again. Red light. I tried a third time, wiping the card on my coat, thinking maybe the magnetic strip was dirty. Red light again. That was when the security guard stepped out from behind his polished marble desk. He looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, unable to meet my gaze. He murmured that I was not allowed in. I stared at him, completely confused. I was the vice president. I practically lived in this building. Before I could demand an explanation, the sharp click of expensive heels echoed across the marble floor. I turned to see Diane, the wife of our CEO, Richard, marching toward me with her daughter Madison trailing closely behind. Diane possessed no actual title at Vanguard, yet she treated the company like her personal country club while her husband played golf in Scotland. Madison was 23, fresh out of a mediocre university and obsessed with social media. She was a nepotism hire who spent her days taking selfies and complaining about the coffee. Diane stopped a few feet away from me, crossing her arms over her designer coat. The smug satisfaction radiating from her was suffocating. She looked me up and down with absolute disdain. Your keycard does not work because you no longer work here, Cassidy, Diane declared, her voice unnaturally loud. The bustling lobby suddenly grew quiet. People waiting for the elevators turned to watch the unfolding drama. My own colleagues, people I had mentored and managed, froze in their tracks. I stood perfectly still, processing her words. Richard and I have decided to take the company in a new direction, Diane continued, projecting her voice so the entire lobby could hear every humiliating syllable. We need fresh, innovative leadership in the executive suite. Madison will be taking over as Vice President of Strategic Partnerships effective immediately. We are terminating your employment. I glanced at Madison. She was not even looking at me. She had her smartphone raised high, the recording light blinking red as she framed herself and her mother in the shot, capturing my public termination for her followers. She was literally filming a vlog while her mother fired the woman who built the department. You were just a stepping stone for my daughter, Diane added, taking a step closer to deliver the final blow. We needed someone to do the grunt work and set up the accounts. Now that the foundation is laid, Madison is ready to take her rightful place. You can leave your badge with security. Do not ever try to contact our clients, or we will have you arrested for corporate espionage. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Dozens of eyes burned into my back. Diane wanted me to break down. She wanted me to cry, to beg for my job, to scream so Madison could catch my breakdown on camera. But I did not give them that satisfaction. I did not shed a single tear or defend my years of relentless dedication. As I looked at Diane's triumphant sneer and Madison's oblivious vanity, a profound icy calm washed over me. They thought they had secured their empire by kicking me out the front door. They had absolutely no idea that the empire did not belong to Vanguard Media. It belonged to me. I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I unclipped my company badge, placed it gently on the security desk, and gave the guard a polite nod. I turned my back on Diane, and Madison walked out into the cold, Chicago morning, got into my car, and drove away, ready to watch their stolen kingdom burn to the ground. I pulled my Audi out of the parking garage and merged into the heavy Chicago traffic. The heater blasted against the freezing winter air, but my hands gripping the leather steering wheel were already perfectly warm. I was not in shock. I was not mourning the loss of my position. I was calculating. 5 years ago, Vanguard Media was a dinosaur gasping for its final breath. Richard had taken over his father's company and driven it straight into the ground with outdated public relations tactics and a complete refusal to adapt to digital ecosystems. When I came on board, they were 6 weeks away from declaring bankruptcy. I worked around the clock, leveraging every contact I had to bring them into the modern era. I targeted the tech sector. I pitched to Gideon, a notoriously ruthless tech billionaire who demanded absolute perfection. But Vanguard had a massive problem. Their financials were a mess, and their security infrastructure was practically non-existent. When Gideon's procurement team ran a vendor compliance check on Vanguard, they failed miserably. They were legally disqualified from signing any direct master service agreements with top-tier tech conglomerates. Richard was terrified. He begged me to find a solution to save his failing legacy. So I did. I spent my own money, hired my own legal counsel, and quietly established Apex Solutions, LLC. Apex met every single stringent security and financial compliance requirement. Gideon's conglomerate signed exclusively with Apex. Apex then subcontracted the daily grunt work to Vanguard. I was the sole proprietor of Apex Solutions. Vanguard never owned those clients. They owned me, or so they thought. Because Richard was so desperate and Diane was so blissfully ignorant of actual corporate law, they never made me sign a non-compete clause regarding Apex. They were just happy the massive checks were clearing and funding their luxurious lifestyle. My car's infotainment screen suddenly lit up. The Bluetooth connection chimed frantically as text messages flooded in from my former team. I glanced at the display while stopped at a red light on Michigan Avenue. Message from Emma, my brilliant former coordinator. Cassidy, please call me. Madison is screaming in the bullpen. Message from Liam, our lead data analyst. Madison is demanding the master passwords for Gideon's data analytics dashboard. She says she has a huge solo presentation at noon. Message from Emma again. She is threatening to fire all of us if we do not log her into the main portal right now. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. Madison actually thought she could just sit in my custom ergonomic chair, open a laptop, and instantly possess the keys to a billion-dollar tech portfolio. She did not understand that the portals did not belong to Vanguard. They were entirely hosted on Apex servers. Vanguard only had access because I allowed it. I tapped the voice command button on my steering wheel. Call Naomi, I instructed. The phone dialed immediately. Naomi is my brother David's wife. She is also a senior partner at one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in Illinois. As a brilliant, no-nonsense African-American woman who built her own reputation by dismantling greedy executives in federal court, she has always been my fiercest protector and my closest confidant. She picked up on the second ring. Please tell me you are calling to say the trap has been sprung? Naomi answered, her voice smooth and carrying the sharp confidence of a woman who charged $1,000 an hour. The trap has been sprung, I confirmed, merging smoothly onto Lakeshore Drive. Diane just fired me in the middle of the lobby. Madison filmed the whole thing for her followers. I am officially unemployed. Naomi let out a rich, echoing laugh that filled the interior of my car. It was the sound of an apex predator spotting its prey. "Oh, this is going to be spectacular," Naomi said. "Tell me they did not ask you to sign a severance agreement or a release of claims." "Diane did not even offer one," I replied, shaking my head at their sheer incompetence. "She just told me I was a stepping stone for her daughter and threatened to have me arrested for corporate espionage if I contacted any clients." "Corporate espionage," Naomi repeated, savoring the utter absurdity of the threat. "That is rich coming from a woman who does not even know how to open a PDF file without calling IT. I assume Madison is currently throwing a massive tantrum because she cannot access the client dashboards." "My phone is blowing up as we speak," I told her. "My former assistants are panicked. Madison has a major presentation with Gideon's team at noon today, and she wants the master passwords to the API connection." The API that Vanguard has absolutely zero legal rights to, Naomi clarified, her tone shifting seamlessly into full lawyer mode. "Let us review the facts, Cassidy. Vanguard Media is an unauthorized third party the moment you are no longer an employee. If they attempt to access Apex Solutions servers without your explicit permission, they are committing federal wire fraud and violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act." "Exactly," I said, a wave of pure satisfaction washing over me. "Vanguard's entire tech division is a subcontractor to my LLC. Without my authorization, they cannot even view the daily traffic reports." "Go home," Naomi instructed, her voice dropping to a serious, commanding register. "Pour yourself a cup of expensive coffee. Log into your private server and sever their access immediately. Terminate Vanguard's sub-vendor credentials completely." If Madison tries to present to Gideon today using blank screens, Gideon will tear her apart in that boardroom. "I am pulling into my building now," I said, steering my Audi into the secured underground garage of my penthouse complex. "I will flip the kill switch the second I get upstairs." "Good," Naomi said softly. "Call me when Diane realizes she just fired the landlord of her entire revenue stream. I want to hear her beg." I ended the call and parked my car in my reserved spot. The morning was just beginning, and the real corporate warfare was about to commence. I grabbed my bag, locked the doors, and walked toward the private elevator. Diane and Madison wanted to play corporate executives. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson in business law. Stepping out of the private elevator and into my penthouse, the quiet hum of the climate control greeted me. I dropped my keys on the console table and walked straight past the floor to ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. I did not have time to admire the view. I walked down the hall and unlocked the heavy, solid oak door to my home office. This was not a makeshift workspace. It was a command center. 3 curved monitors sat on a custom standing desk, connected to a custom-built server rack, humming quietly in the corner. This room was the physical heartbeat of Apex Solutions, LLC. I woke up, the screens typed in my encrypted master password, and accessed the back end of the Apex server. The interface loaded in a crisp, dark mode, displaying the active data streams for all 5 tech conglomerates we serviced. I clicked on the largest tile on the dashboard, the one labeled with Gideon's corporate logo. Gideon was a man who demanded real-time sentiment analysis, predictive public relations modeling, and global market tracking. He paid millions for that data. Vanguard Media collected the check, but my servers crunched the numbers. I opened the user management console. A neat list of active sessions populated the screen. I could see exactly who was logged in from the Vanguard Media IP address. Emma and Liam were both online, likely scrambling to compile data for Madison's noon presentation. And there it was. A brand new user account had just been provisioned 10 minutes ago. Administrator Madison. Diane must have forced the IT department to bypass standard protocol and grant her daughter top-tier access using my old credentials. They really thought it was that easy. They thought business was just about putting your name on a door and smiling for the camera. They did not understand the intricate web of master service agreements, API keys, and data privacy laws that held this empire together. When I formed Apex Solutions 5 years ago, I did it to save Richard from his own financial incompetence. Gideon's procurement officers had taken one look at Vanguard's audited financials and laughed. They refused to sign a direct contract with a company holding so much toxic debt. So I stepped in. I legally established Apex as an independent entity with pristine financials. Gideon signed with Apex. Apex signed a sub-vendor agreement with Vanguard. The crucial detail, the one Diane was too arrogant to verify, was that the sub-vendor agreement was contingent on my employment at Vanguard as the lead account executive. When Diane fired me in the lobby, she legally terminated the bridge between Vanguard and Apex. I was no longer an employee. Therefore, Vanguard was no longer an authorized user of Apex proprietary systems. If I left their access active, I would technically be violating my own data compliance contracts with Gideon. I was just doing my job. I was securing client data. I navigated to the API Key Management tab. The screen displayed the primary authentication token that linked Vanguard's entire internal network to the Apex data lake. Without this token, their screens would go blank. Every dashboard, every analytics report, every automated client update would instantly sever. They would be left with empty web browsers and error codes. I watched the live activity feed. Madison was currently running a massive data query, trying to pull 5 years of historical public relations metrics to build her presentation deck. She was attempting to download gigabytes of proprietary client data onto a local Vanguard machine. That was a massive security violation. I moved my cursor over the bright red button labeled Revoke Access. I did not hesitate. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I clicked the button. A prompt appeared asking me to confirm the global revocation of Vanguard Media sub-vendor credentials. I typed in my confirmation code and hit enter. The active session count on my screen instantly plummeted from 47 down to 0. The data stream flatlined. The API keys dissolved into inactive status. I watched the server logs record the exact timestamp. It was exactly 42 minutes after Diane had stripped me of my company badge. The digital guillotine had dropped. Vanguard Media was officially blind, deaf, and disconnected from the lifeblood of their revenue. For a moment, the room was perfectly silent. Then, my cell phone began to vibrate violently against the wooden desk. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. The Vanguard employee group chat, which I had not yet been removed from, was exploding. Liam sent a message saying the entire analytical framework just crashed. Emma responded that she was getting a fatal gateway error on all client portals. Another account manager asked if the Wi-Fi was down. Then Liam sent a message that made me smile. He said it was not the Wi-Fi because the system was throwing an unauthorized third-party error. My private text messages started rolling in next. Emma texted me directly. Cassidy, the servers just locked us out. Madison is screaming at the IT director. The IT director is telling her he has no back-end access because the servers are external. What is going on? I did not reply to Emma. She was a good coordinator, but she was still a Vanguard employee. Any communication from me could be twisted by Diane's lawyers. Instead, I took a screenshot of the server log showing the exact moment the access was revoked due to a change in employment status. I opened my secure email client and attached the screenshot. I addressed the email to Naomi at her law firm. The subject line was simple: Sub-vendor access terminated per employment cessation. I hit send. Naomi now had the time-stamped digital evidence she needed to prove I acted in accordance with data privacy laws immediately after being wrongfully terminated. The legal wall was built. I was perfectly insulated from any accusations of corporate sabotage. I was merely an independent business owner protecting her assets from unauthorized trespassers. My phone started ringing. The caller ID flashed with Diane's name. I let it ring, watching the phone buzz across the desk. She called again. Then she called a third time. The panic was setting in. She was realizing that firing the person who actually ran the company had immediate catastrophic consequences. I picked up my phone, turned the ringer volume all the way off, and placed it face down on the desk. I walked into my kitchen to make myself a very expensive cup of coffee. The domino had tipped, and I was going to enjoy watching every single piece fall. Let them sweat. The real nightmare for Vanguard Media was only just beginning. By 11:30 that morning, my phone had transitioned from intermittent buzzing to a relentless, continuous vibration. I sat at my kitchen island sipping a brewed espresso, watching the digital carnage unfold across my secondary monitor. Emma had created a burner messaging account to give me a play-by-play of the meltdown inside Vanguard Media, and the updates were nothing short of spectacular. According to Emma, Madison had marched into the executive boardroom at 11:45. She was wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my first car, flanked by two junior analysts carrying perfectly bound but ultimately useless paper agendas. Gideon and his entire executive team from the tech conglomerate were attending virtually via a massive encrypted video conference feed. Gideon was a man who optimized his life down to the millisecond. He expected his public relations and crisis management teams to operate with the same ruthless efficiency. At precisely noon, Madison confidently clicked the wireless remote to launch the proprietary analytics dashboard. Emma sent a text describing the exact shade of pale Madison, turned when the 80-inch display screen flashed a massive high-contrast authorization error. The system did not just deny her access. It displayed a hard-coded legal disclaimer stating that the sub-vendor license held by Vanguard Media had been terminated by the master licensor. Madison tried to laugh it off. She told Gideon it was a simple server glitch and aggressively signaled the IT director to fix it. But there was nothing to fix. The IT director had already spent the last 2 hours sweating through his shirt, trying to bypass military-grade encryption that my team at Apex Solutions had built specifically to prevent backdoor access. He had to stand in front of the camera looking directly at a furious billionaire and admit that Vanguard no longer had the administrative privileges required to view, export, or manage any of the client data. Gideon did not yell. He did not throw a tantrum. Emma texted that his reaction was far more terrifying. He simply muted his microphone, leaned forward, and typed a single message into the chat box. The message demanded to know where Cassidy was. Madison, panicking and completely lacking any crisis management skills, lied. She typed back that I was on an unexpected leave of absence and that she was personally handling his account moving forward. Gideon unmuted his microphone. Emma sent a direct quote of what he said next. He told Madison that he did not sign contracts with amateurs who could not even manage their own local area networks. He told her she had exactly 60 seconds to get the real-time sentiment analysis on his screen, or he was initiating a breach of contract protocol. Madison froze. She looked at her mother, who was standing off-camera, furiously tapping on her cell phone. The 60 seconds passed in agonizing silence. Gideon disconnected the call. The video feed went black. It was the most catastrophic failure in Vanguard Media history, and it took exactly 1 minute to happen. At 12:15, my phone screen illuminated with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed Diane's personal cell phone number. She had stopped trying to use the corporate lines. She was desperate. I let it ring 4 times, savoring the moment, before I finally swiped the green icon and brought the phone to my ear. Cassidy. Diane barked, her voice stripped of the smug, aristocratic superiority she had weaponized in the lobby just hours prior. She sounded breathless, frantic, and barely holding back a hysterical scream. "You need to fix this glitch immediately. I do not know what kind of petty, vindictive game you are playing, but you are jeopardizing a billion-dollar account. Log in right now and restore Madison access before I call the police." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. The roast was rich, complex, and deeply satisfying. "I am not playing a game, Diane," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "And there is no glitch on the servers. Then why are the dashboards locked? She shrieked, the panic finally breaking through her aggressive facade. Madison just had to sit there looking like an idiot in front of Gideon. You are throwing a tantrum because we let you go. You are acting like a spoiled child. I am ordering you to turn the system back on right this second. You cannot order me to do anything I stated simply. You fired me, remember? You stood in the lobby in front of dozens of witnesses and explicitly terminated my employment. You took my badge. You told me I was a stepping stone. This is company property. Diane yelled, her breathing turning ragged. You are holding company property hostage. That is where you are fundamentally mistaken, I corrected her. You should really have your legal counsel review the contracts you sign. Vanguard Media does not own that data infrastructure. Apex Solutions, LLC, owns that infrastructure. Vanguard was operating under a conditional sub-vendor agreement. That agreement was explicitly tethered to my employment status as your lead account executive. When you terminated me, you legally terminated your own access to the Apex servers. Silence hung on the line. I could hear Diane, heavy, panicked breathing. She was mentally scrambling, trying to understand the massive legal wall she had just crashed her expensive sports car into. Listen to me, Diane pleaded, trying a new tactic. Her voice dropped, attempting a desperate imitation of maternal negotiation. We can figure this out. Maybe we were a bit hasty this morning. Just give Madison the password so we can save the Gideon account and we can discuss a consulting fee for you. I will write you a check right now. Diane, I said, my voice dropping to a freezing temperature. Apex Solutions does not offer free IT support to subcontractors. I pressed the button and ended the call right then. I set my phone down on the marble countertop. The silence in my apartment felt heavy, charged with the energy of a bomb. I had hung up on Diane, cutting off the wife of the CEO mid-sentence. 5 years of biting my tongue, nodding at her condescending remarks, and fixing the mistakes of her daughter had culminated in that single click of the end call button. I took another sip of my espresso, savoring the rich, dark roast as I watched the snow fall outside my window, expecting the adrenaline to carry me through the afternoon. But the corporate warfare was far from over. In fact, the true battle line was just being drawn. 30 minutes later, my laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender was the internal legal counsel of Vanguard Media, but the aggressive subject line had Diane written all over it. It read, "Urgent demand for immediate compliance and cease and desist." I opened the message and leaned in to read the block of text. It was a masterpiece of desperation masked as legal authority. Diane had clearly dictated the contents. The letter accused me of unauthorized data manipulation, intellectual property theft, and digital extortion. The absolute peak of her hysteria was buried in the third paragraph. The document formally accused me of committing acts of cyber-terrorism against a private enterprise. They claimed my actions were a malicious attack on the infrastructure of Vanguard Media, causing irreparable financial harm and threatening their livelihood. Diane also included a vicious ultimatum. She explicitly stated that if I did not hand over the administrative credentials by 3 this afternoon, she would ensure I never worked in Chicago again. She threatened to leverage every country club connection to blacklist me across the entire public relations sector. She promised to ruin my reputation so thoroughly that I would be lucky to find an entry-level job. The icy calm that sustained me all morning fractured. A cold knot formed in my stomach. My heart rate spiked against my ribs. I gripped the kitchen island, fighting nausea. It was not the threat of a lawsuit that scared me. My contracts were ironclad. It was the psychological manipulation, the sheer venom of her words that transported me backward in time. Reading the email felt exactly like listening to my biological mother, Patricia. She was a master class in gaslighting. She worshipped wealth, constantly making me feel like an ungrateful burden. Whenever I stepped out of line, she used her social leverage to crush me. She twisted reality, painting herself as the victim. She told me my memories were fabricated and that she would ensure our family knew how toxic I was if I did not comply. Diane was using the exact same playbook. She was projecting her incompetence onto me, calling me a terrorist for enforcing a contract. For a suffocating minute, I felt like a helpless teenager again. The walls of my penthouse seemed to close in. Imposter syndrome whispered that Diane was right. Maybe I had gone too far. Maybe she really could destroy the career I sacrificed my 20s to build. I stared at the screen, contemplating writing an apology. I forced myself to step back. I took a deep breath and exhaled. I counted to 10. I looked around my luxurious apartment at the life I had built on my own merit. I was not a scared teenager anymore. I was 33. I was the founder of Apex Solutions. I held the keys to $1 billion kingdom. I refused to let another manipulative woman control my reality. I stepped back to the computer, saved the email, and opened a new message. I attached the document and typed in the secure email address of my sister-in-law, Naomi. I wrote, "Vanguard is claiming cyber terrorism and threatening a citywide blacklist. Please advise." I hit send and walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of ice water. My cell phone rang less than 2 full minutes later. I answered it immediately on the first ring, eager to hear her perspective. Naomi did not bother with a greeting. Did they actually put the words cyber terrorism in a written document transmitted across state lines? She asked, her voice tight with suppressed amusement. They put it in bold font. I confirmed, feeling my anxiety dissolve. Diane also threatened to use her personal network to blacklist me. She wants the passwords by 3 this afternoon. Naomi let out a sharp, echoing sound that was half laugh, half scoff. "This is the most legally hollow garbage I have seen in my career as a litigator," she said, excitement palpable in her tone. Accusing a business owner of terrorism for enforcing a vendor agreement is documented defamation. Not to mention the tortious interference with your business prospects regarding the blacklist threat. They handed us their execution warrant on a silver platter. I felt a small smile return to my face. "So I should not send them the passwords." "You are going to do nothing of the sort," Naomi commanded, the authority rolling off her tongue. "Vanguard thinks they can bully you into submission because they still view you as the help. They think you are an isolated, weak target. It is time we remind them exactly who they are dealing with, and more importantly, who represents you." "What is the play?" I asked, completely ready to follow her lead. "Go to your closet," Naomi instructed without hesitation. "Put on the most expensive, intimidating suit you own. Do not wear black, wear crimson. We want them to see blood. I am leaving the courthouse right now. We are not doing this over email anymore. We are going to meet Diane and whatever pathetic excuse for a lawyer she dragged into this mess. I will text you the address. Be ready in 30 minutes. I smiled, the fire returning to my veins. "I am ready now," I said, feeling invincible. I ended the call with Naomi and walked straight into my master bedroom. The walk-in closet was expansive, filled with the professional armor I had acquired over the last 5 years. I bypassed the standard navy blazers and the safe charcoal trousers. Naomi had given me a very specific directive. I reached for the far end of the rack and pulled out a tailored, bespoke crimson suit. I had bought it in Paris after closing my first $50 million deal, but I had never actually worn it to the Vanguard offices. Diane had a strict, unspoken rule about other women wearing bold colors in her presence. She preferred her subordinates to blend into the background, wearing muted tones that never drew the eye away from her own designer outfits. Today, I was not a subordinate. I was the executioner. I slipped into the crimson suit, paired it with a crisp white silk blouse, and stepped into black stiletto heels. I looked in the mirror. I did not look like an employee who had just been publicly fired. I looked like a woman who owned the building. My phone buzzed on the vanity. Naomi had sent a calendar invite. The location was a hyper-exclusive, members-only coffee lounge in the Gold Coast district. It was exactly the kind of pretentious, overpriced establishment Diane frequented to ensure she only rubbed elbows with Chicago's elite. I grabbed my leather briefcase, locked the penthouse, and took the elevator down to the garage. The drive to the Gold Coast took 20 minutes. I used the time to mentally review the structure of Apex Solutions LLC. I knew every clause, every sub-vendor stipulation, and every data compliance metric. Vanguard had absolutely no legal footing. They were running on pure audacity and the historical assumption that I would simply bow my head and obey. I handed my keys to the valet outside the coffee lounge and walked through the heavy glass doors. The interior was a masterclass in modern minimalist wealth. Dark mahogany paneling, velvet seating, and the overwhelming scent of roasted espresso and expensive perfume filled the air. I scanned the room. It did not take long to spot them. Diane was sitting in a circular velvet booth near the back windows. She was wearing a stark white cashmere coat draped over her shoulders, sipping sparkling water with an air of practiced impatience. Sitting next to her was Harrison Cole, Vanguard's notoriously smug in-house counsel. Harrison was a man who relied entirely on intimidation rather than actual legal acumen. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a tailored pinstripe suit, aggressively tapping a silver pen against a leather folio. I took a slow, steady breath, letting the crimson suit do the talking as I crossed the room. Several patrons turned their heads to watch me walk past. The bright red fabric commanded attention in a sea of beige and black. Diane caught sight of me when I was 10 feet away. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, registering the wardrobe choice and the sheer defiance it represented, before she quickly masked her surprise with a look of bored condescension. Harrison stopped tapping his pen and sat up straighter, adjusting his tie. I reached the table and did not wait for an invitation. I pulled out the chair directly across from Diane and sat down, placing my briefcase on the floor. I crossed my legs, leaned back, and looked at her. I did not say a word. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to initiate the engagement. Diane placed her water glass on the table. She looked at me with a sickeningly sweet smile, playing the role of the benevolent dictator who was simply disappointed in a wayward child. "Cassidy," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy, "I am so glad you decided to be reasonable and meet with us. This entire morning has been completely unnecessary. You are acting entirely out of character, and frankly, you are embarrassing yourself." I kept my expression entirely neutral. "I am acting precisely within the parameters of my commercial rights," I replied. Harrison leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the table. He offered a patronizing chuckle. "Let us drop the corporate posturing, Cassidy. We all know you are upset about the transition this morning. Change is difficult. However, locking the company out of its own client dashboards is a serious federal offense. You are tampering with Vanguard's proprietary assets. We drafted a cease and desist, but Diane convinced me to hold off on contacting the authorities. She wants to handle this amicably." "Proprietary assets," I repeated, tasting the words. "You should check the server hosting agreements, Harrison. Vanguard does not own those dashboards." Diane waved a hand dismissively, cutting off her own lawyer. "We are not here to debate technicalities," she stated, leaning closer. "We are here because I am willing to show you grace. You come from a very modest background, Cassidy. We brought you into this tier of society. We gave you a salary that paid for that expensive suit you are wearing. You forgot your place this morning, but I am a forgiving woman." She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crisp, embossed envelope. She slid it across the polished wooden table until it rested right in front of me. "Inside that envelope is a certified cashier's check for $10,000. Diane said, her tone implying she was handing me a winning lottery ticket. "It is a generous severance package. More than you deserve, frankly, given your insubordination. All you have to do is write down the master administrative passwords to the Gideon accounts right now. You take the money, you sign a standard non-disclosure agreement, and we agree not to pursue criminal charges against you for your little cyber stunt. You get to walk away with your freedom, and Madison gets to resume her work." I looked down at the envelope. $10,000. It was a pathetic, insulting number. Gideon's contract alone billed at $2 million annually. Diane genuinely believed she could buy my life's work for the price of a cheap, used car. She was relying on the psychological grip she thought she still had over me. She expected me to take the crumbs she was offering, and disappear out of fear. $10,000, I said softly, looking back up at her. You are trying to buy $1 billion data infrastructure with a $10,000 check. Do not push your luck, little girl, Diane, hissed the benevolent mask, slipping to reveal the venom underneath. You have no leverage, you have no resources. Take the money, give my daughter the passwords, and leave quietly before I crush you. I did not reach for the envelope. I did not flinch. I just glanced toward the front entrance of the coffee lounge, right as the heavy glass doors swung open. I smiled, feeling the crimson suit perfectly matching the incoming carnage. I looked back at Diane. I think we should wait for my legal counsel to review your offer, I said. Harrison scoffed, adjusting his cuffs with an arrogant flick of his wrists. Legal counsel, Cassidy, do not make this more difficult than it needs to be. You do not have the resources to fight a corporate entity like Vanguard Media in federal court. She will not have to, a smooth, commanding voice echoed behind him. Naomi materialized at the edge of our table like a force of nature. She was a striking African-American woman radiating absolute authority. She wore a tailored charcoal gray Armani suit with razor-sharp lapels that mirrored her intellect. Her presence instantly dropped the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Naomi did not just walk into a space, she conquered it. As a senior partner at one of the most feared corporate litigation firms in Chicago, she had dismantled executives far more intimidating than the two amateurs sitting across from me. She did not wait for an invitation to join us. Naomi pulled up a chair next to mine, moving with deliberate, unhurried precision. She placed a thick black leather portfolio on the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud that made Diane flinch. "Who are you?" Diane demanded, her voice losing its previously honeyed tone. She glanced at Harrison, expecting him to handle the intrusion. "This is a private, confidential business meeting." "There is nothing confidential happening here, Diane," Naomi replied, not even bothering to look at the CEO's wife. Instead, she locked her piercing gaze entirely on Harrison. "Naomi Kensington," she stated, intentionally using my brother's last name. "I am the lead legal counsel representing Apex Solutions LLC and its sole proprietor, my client Cassidy, and you must be Harrison Cole. I read your cease and desist letter this morning. I must admit I was deeply entertained. It has been years since I saw a legal document so fundamentally detached from reality." Harrison puffed out his chest, his face flushing a mottled pink. "Listen here, Ms. Kensington. Your client committed an act of cyber terrorism against Vanguard Media. She locked our entire executive team out of our proprietary client dashboards. If she does not hand over those administrative credentials immediately, we are pursuing federal charges." Naomi offered a slow, predatory smile. She opened her leather portfolio and extracted a perfectly crisp, heavily tabbed stack of legal documents. "Harrison, when you accepted the position as in-house counsel for Vanguard Media, did you actually bother to read the vendor compliance contracts your company signed 5 years ago, or did you just skim the executive summaries?" "I know every contract this company holds," Harrison snapped back, though a bead of sweat materialized on his forehead. "Clearly you do not," Naomi countered, her voice dropping into a deadly professional cadence. "Because if you did, you would know that Vanguard Media does not own a single line of code, a single data node, or a single client portal associated with Gideon's tech conglomerate. Vanguard Media failed their vendor compliance audit 5 years ago due to severe financial liabilities. Gideon's procurement team legally disqualified your company from holding direct tech contracts." Diane stared at Naomi, her mouth slightly open. "That is a lie. Vanguard manages those accounts. I see the revenue reports." Naomi finally turned her attention to Diane. "You see the revenue, Diane, because my client allowed you to. Cassidy single-handedly formed Apex Solutions LLC to bypass your husband's toxic financial standing. Gideon signed the master service agreement directly with Apex. Apex then drafted a secondary, highly conditional sub-vendor agreement with Vanguard Media." Naomi slid a highlighted document across the table. It stopped exactly an inch from Harrison's hand. Article 4, Section 2 of the Sub-Vendor Agreement. Vanguard Media is granted temporary restricted API access to Apex servers, strictly contingent upon Cassidy maintaining her role as the lead account executive at Vanguard. The second you terminated her employment, you legally severed your own sub-vendor status. You are no longer authorized users. Harrison picked up the document. His eyes darted rapidly across the highlighted text. The color drained from his face as the legal reality crashed down on him. He realized in real time that he had threatened a business owner for securing her own private servers. My client did not commit cyber terrorism, Naomi continued, her voice ringing with absolute finality. She secured her proprietary data from an unauthorized third party. You fired the bridge that connected your company to a billion-dollar tech portfolio. Madison locking herself out of a presentation is not a federal crime. It is a consequence of your own staggering administrative incompetence. Diane looked at Harrison, panic welling in her eyes. Harrison, tell her she is wrong. Tell her we own those clients. Harrison swallowed hard. He placed the contract back on the table. He could not look at his boss's wife. He knew Naomi had them dead to rights. Now, Naomi said, shifting her focus back to the $10,000 cashier's check sitting in the center of the table. She picked it up between her index and middle fingers, inspecting it as if it were a piece of discarded trash. Diane, you brought a $10,000 check to buy the keys to a data infrastructure worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You thought you could exploit my client's background, intimidate her in a coffee shop, and steal her intellectual property. Naomi casually tossed the envelope back across the table. It slid directly into Diane's lap. Keep your pocket change, Naomi instructed coldly. You are going to need every penny for the upcoming litigation. Naomi reached into her portfolio one last time. She pulled out a fresh, stark white invoice printed on heavy cardstock bearing the Apex Solutions LLC letterhead. She placed it exactly where the severance check had been resting moments prior. What is this? Diane whispered, staring at the document as if it were a venomous snake. That is an invoice for $250,000, Naomi stated, packing up her portfolio with brisk, efficient movements. It is the standard penalty fee for unauthorized attempted access to Apex proprietary software by non-credentialed personnel. Madison triggered our security protocols 12 times this morning, trying to force her way into the system. Payment is due in 30 days. Diane stared at the invoice, her face turning an ashen, sickly shade of pale. The smug, aristocratic superiority she had worn in the lobby was entirely gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. If you fail to pay this invoice, or if you ever send another baseless legal threat to my client, Naomi promised, leaning over the table so Diane could hear every single syllable clearly, I will personally file a lawsuit for tortious interference, defamation, and breach of contract. I will drag Vanguard Media into a public courtroom, and I will dismantle your husband's legacy piece by piece. Are we absolutely clear? Harrison nodded numbly. Diane could not even speak. She sat paralyzed in her velvet booth, staring at the mountain of debt she had just triggered. I stood up, smoothing the front of my crimson suit. I picked up my briefcase, feeling 10 feet tall. I did not say goodbye. I simply turned and walked out of the coffee lounge alongside Naomi, leaving Diane and her useless lawyer drowning in the reality of their own arrogance. While Diane sat paralyzed in that velvet coffee shop booth 5,000 miles away from the freezing streets of Chicago. The weather at the St. Andrews Golf Links in Scotland was surprisingly mild. Richard adjusted his grip on his custom titanium driver, preparing to sink a crucial putt on the 18th hole. He was enjoying a 3-week executive retreat entirely disconnected from the daily operations of Vanguard Media. He paid himself a handsome 8-figure salary to delegate the actual labor to people like me, while allowing his wife to play corporate royalty in the office. He swung his club, but before the ball could even approach the hole, his caddy sprinted across the green, carrying a violently vibrating satellite phone. Richard snatched the device, his face flushed with irritation at the sudden interruption. The caller ID flashed with the name of Vanguard's chief financial officer. Richard answered with a sharp bark, demanding to know why his expensive vacation was being disturbed. The voice on the other end did not offer apologies. The CFO was in a state of absolute, unmitigated panic. He informed Richard that Vanguard Media stock, which had been perfectly stable for 5 consecutive years, thanks entirely to the tech portfolio I built, was currently in a terrifying freefall. Institutional investors were dumping their shares at an alarming rate. Industry message boards and financial news outlets were already buzzing with a catastrophic rumor. The rumor stated that Gideon's massive tech conglomerate, along with 4 other major Silicon Valley clients, had abruptly severed all ties with Vanguard Media. The CFO screamed into the phone that the data portals were completely dead, the API keys were permanently revoked, and the client relations department was fielding furious calls from billionaires threatening immediate breach of contract lawsuits. Richard dropped his golf club. The titanium hit the pristine Scottish grass with a dull thud. The color completely drained from his face as he realized his entire corporate empire was actively burning to the ground. Richard immediately disconnected the call with his CFO and dialed his wife. Diane was sitting in the back of her chauffeured town car, still physically shaking from her encounter with Naomi and me. The $250,000 invoice was burning a hole in her designer handbag. When her phone rang and she saw her husband's name, she hesitated. She knew Richard was oblivious to the actual legal structure of the company. He only cared about the quarterly profit margins. She took a trembling breath and answered the call, attempting to sound perfectly composed. Richard bypassed any pleasantries and launched into a deafening expletive-laced tirade. His voice echoed through the car's Bluetooth speakers, causing the driver to physically flinch. Richard demanded to know what on earth Diane had done to the tech department. He screamed that the board of directors was calling for an emergency meeting. Investors were panicking, and the company valuation was hemorrhaging millions of dollars by the minute. He had left her in charge of basic internal politics, not to detonate a nuclear bomb inside their primary revenue stream. Diane tried to interject, her voice pitching an octave higher as she scrambled for a plausible lie. She desperately attempted to downplay the catastrophe. She told Richard it was just a minor technical glitch, a brief server migration issue that the IT department was currently handling. She insisted that the market rumors were vastly exaggerated by jealous competitors. Richard cut her off with a vicious roar. He told her the market did not panic over a minor IT glitch. He demanded to know exactly where I was, explicitly stating that I was the only person who knew how to handle Gideon's temperamental executive team. He ordered Diane to march into my office, put me on the phone, and hand me whatever massive bonus I wanted to stop the bleeding. Diane swallowed hard, her throat painfully dry. She could not bring herself to admit the truth. She could not confess that she had publicly fired the only competent executive in the building just to hand her daughter an unearned title. She knew Richard would file for divorce and strip her of her limitless credit cards if he discovered her petty jealousy had bankrupted his father's legacy. She told Richard she would handle it and abruptly hung up the phone, her hands trembling violently. The town car pulled up to the Vanguard Media building. Diane stormed through the lobby, ignoring the curious stares of the employees she had commanded to witness my termination that morning. She marched directly to the executive suite and shoved open the heavy glass door to my former corner office. The scene inside was pure chaos. Madison was sitting in my custom ergonomic chair, surrounded by discarded presentation folders and cold cups of coffee. She was not filming a victory vlog anymore. She was sobbing hysterically. Her expensive makeup was completely ruined, running down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. Her desk phone was ringing continuously, a relentless, piercing sound that cut through the room like a siren. The blinking red lights on the console indicated that every single line was an incoming priority call from a furious client. Madison looked up at her mother, her eyes wide with absolute terror. She pointed a shaking finger at the flashing phone. It was Gideon's chief of staff calling for the 5th time in 20 minutes. They were demanding to speak to me immediately. They wanted their real-time market analytics, and they wanted an explanation for the sudden dashboard blackout. Madison wailed that she had no idea what to tell them. She did not know how to read the raw data files, she did not know the terminology they were using, and she had completely failed her single attempt to bluff her way through the noon conference call. She cried that the clients were threatening to sue her personally for gross negligence. Diane locked the office door, shutting out the nervous whispers of the administrative assistants in the hallway. She paced the length of the room, her mind racing through the disastrous consequences of her actions. She looked at her daughter, who was hyperventilating over a ringing telephone, and realized the sheer magnitude of her blunder. They were completely outmatched. I held all the cards, and Naomi had ensured the legal fortress around Apex Solutions was utterly impenetrable. But Diane was not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully. She was a narcissist cornered by her own arrogance. She refused to take accountability. If she admitted fault, her lavish lifestyle would instantly vanish. She needed a scapegoat, and she needed a narrative that painted her as the victim of a malicious scheme. She walked over to Madison and slammed her hand down on the flashing desk phone, disconnecting the incoming call from Gideon's team. She grabbed her daughter by the shoulders, forcing Madison to stop crying and look at her. Diane's eyes were cold, calculating, and filled with a venomous determination. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed Richard back. When he answered, still raging from the golf course, Diane fed him the most dangerous lie of her life. She told her husband that the company was not failing because of a glitch. She claimed that I was a corporate saboteur. She spun a fabricated tale, insisting that she had discovered me embezzling funds and funneling client data to competitors. She told Richard that she had been forced to terminate me to protect the company, and that in retaliation, I had launched a malicious cyber attack to hold Vanguard hostage. Richard demanded to know how they were going to fix it before Gideon permanently walked away. Diane looked at my empty desk, her jaw set in a rigid line of pure malice. She promised her husband that she would fix everything. She vowed to destroy my reputation so thoroughly that the entire tech industry would view me as a radioactive liability. She swore she would manipulate the narrative, ruin my credibility, and force Gideon to drop my contracts out of sheer self-preservation. She was going to wage a total war in the press, and she would not stop until I was begging for mercy. Stepping out of the coffee lounge and onto the freezing Chicago pavement, the crisp winter air tasted like absolute victory. Naomi gave me a sharp, approving nod before stepping into her waiting town car, her parting advice ringing in my ears to keep my phone on silent and let the invoice do its work. I walked the 2 blocks back to my apartment with a newly discovered swagger. I had successfully defended my intellectual property and left Diane completely paralyzed. I assumed the next step would be a frantic call from Richard offering a multi-million-dollar settlement, or perhaps absolute silence, while Vanguard Media folded under the weight of their own incompetence. What I did not anticipate was how quickly the battlefield would shift from corporate law to the court of public opinion. I had barely taken off my crimson coat and poured myself a glass of water when my phone screen illuminated with a rapid, ceaseless flurry of push notifications. This was not the secure communication channel from Emma or my former team. These were social media alerts. Twitter mentions, Instagram tags, and a sudden barrage of LinkedIn connection requests. My heart skipped a beat. I opened the Instagram app and immediately saw what was causing the digital avalanche. Madison had gone live. She had not just posted a simple statement. She had orchestrated a masterclass in modern digital manipulation. The video was already circulating with hundreds of thousands of views, pushed by Vanguard's own social media algorithms and Madison's network of affluent influencers. I tapped the screen and watched the absolute fiction unfold. Madison was sitting in what looked like her childhood bedroom, stripped of her usual heavy makeup and designer accessories. She wore a simple, oversized sweater, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. She looked incredibly fragile, young, and entirely victimized. It was a calculated, brilliant aesthetic choice. She stared into the camera with red, tear-filled eyes and began to speak in a trembling voice. She introduced herself not as the newly appointed vice president who had just stolen my job, but as a young woman trying to learn the ropes of her family's humble business. She cried as she described a toxic, disgruntled former employee who had been fired for creating a hostile work environment. She did not use my full name, but she dropped enough identifying details that anyone in the Chicago public relations sector knew exactly who she was talking about. Madison sobbed as she told her followers that this bitter former employee had hacked into their family company servers, locked them out of their own client dashboards, and was now demanding a $250,000 ransom to release the data. She used the words blackmail, extortion, and cyberbullying. She painted Apex Solutions not as a legitimate vendor protecting its intellectual property, but as a shell company I had maliciously set up to siphon money from her hardworking parents. She wiped away a single, perfectly timed crocodile tear and begged the public to understand why Vanguard might experience a slight delay in client communications. She framed the entire catastrophic failure of her morning presentation as the result of a vicious cyber attack by a jealous older woman who could not handle seeing a young female executive succeed. The Instagram video was just the opening salvo. I switched over to LinkedIn, the professional networking site where my entire career reputation lived. Madison had cross-posted a heavily sanitized corporate version of her tearful video. She had written a lengthy, impassioned essay about the dangers of workplace toxicity and the shocking reality of digital extortion in the modern corporate world. She tagged prominent Chicago business leaders, female empowerment groups, and even local tech journalists. The comments section was a nightmare. Industry peers, people I had networked with at charity galas and corporate luncheons, were swarming the post with messages of support for Madison. Competitors of Vanguard Media were publicly condemning my alleged actions, eager to score easy virtue points on the internet. I saw comments calling for my immediate arrest. I saw self-proclaimed cybersecurity experts analyzing Madison's fabricated claims and demanding that I be permanently banned from the tech sector. The narrative was spiraling out of control faster than any legal injunction could stop it. The sheer volume of the hatred was suffocating. My chest tightened, and the air in my spacious penthouse suddenly felt incredibly thin. I sank onto my living room sofa, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the endless wave of vitriol. This was the dark side of the digital age. The truth did not matter when a wealthy, attractive young woman was crying on camera. The internet loved a villain, and Madison had painted a massive target squarely on my back. A wave of intense, crippling anxiety washed over me. The crimson suit that had made me feel so powerful an hour ago now felt like a heavy, suffocating costume. I was fighting a multi-million-dollar corporation, and they were using every dirty trick in the book to destroy me. The societal pressure of being branded a toxic extortionist was immense. I had spent my entire adult life meticulously cultivating a reputation of professionalism, reliability, and absolute integrity. I had worked 80-hour weeks so that my name would be synonymous with excellence. In less than 45 minutes, Madison had weaponized her tears to reduce my entire legacy to ashes. I closed the social media applications, but the damage was already echoing in my mind. The anxiety triggered old, deeply buried trauma. This was exactly how my biological family used to operate. Whenever I tried to set a boundary or stand up for myself, they would immediately twist the narrative, rushing to tell our neighbors and relatives that I was an unstable, ungrateful daughter, causing them endless grief. The gaslighting was so severe, it made me question my own sanity. Diane and Madison were employing the exact same psychological warfare on a massive public scale. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, feeling a profound sense of isolation. Naomi had legally protected my business, but the court of public opinion operated completely outside the bounds of the justice system. I was watching my professional reputation burn in real time. My pulse raced and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I needed to formulate a response. I needed to release a statement. I needed to fight back. But the sheer velocity of the smear campaign left me paralyzed. Before I could even attempt to draft a rational thought, my phone screen lit up again. The caller ID displayed a name that made my blood run absolutely cold, signaling that the public humiliation was about to breach my personal life. The caller ID flashing on my screen was Patricia, my biological mother. We had a strained relationship at the best of times, held together by obligatory holiday dinners and brief phone calls, where she mostly talked about her social calendar. Patricia was a woman who valued proximity to wealth above oxygen. She spent her entire adult life clawing her way into the peripheral circles of Chicago's elite, desperate to be accepted by the very people who looked right through her. People exactly like Diane. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the inevitable, and answered the call. "What on earth is wrong with you?" Patricia hissed into the receiver before I could even say hello. Her voice was shrill, vibrating with a frantic energy that instantly made my jaw clench. "Do you have any idea what you have done? My phone has been ringing off the hook for the last 20 minutes. The entire club is talking about this." I sat up straighter on the sofa, gripping the phone tightly. "Hello to you too, Mother. I am doing fine, thank you for asking. Being publicly fired and slandered on the internet is going great." "Do not use that sarcastic tone with me, Cassidy," Patricia snapped, completely ignoring my pain. "I just got off the phone with Beverly, who was just at a charity luncheon with Diane. Diane was in absolute tears. She said you hacked into Vanguard Media and are holding their client data hostage for money. She said Madison had a complete panic attack because of your cyberbullying. Have you lost your mind? Are you actively trying to ruin my life?" The sheer narcissism of her statement hit me like a physical blow. "Your life?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. "Diane fired me in front of the entire company this morning. She tried to extort my proprietary business assets for a fraction of their worth. Madison took my job and then posted a fabricated video to destroy my professional reputation. And you are worried about your life." "I am worried about my reputation," Patricia countered, her voice reaching a fever pitch of indignation. "I have spent 10 years cultivating relationships with these women. I finally got an invitation to join the Summer Gala Planning Committee. Do you know how hard I worked for that? Now Diane is telling everyone that my daughter is a criminal extortionist. I am going to be a laughingstock. They will strip my membership." I closed my eyes, a profound sense of exhaustion washing over me. It was the same script she had used my entire life. Whenever a teacher, a coach, or a boss treated me unfairly, Patricia never took my side. She always sided with authority, with wealth, and with status. She would rather sacrifice her own daughter to the wolves than risk a moment of social awkwardness at a cocktail party. "The data belongs to my LLC, Mother," I explained, forcing myself to remain calm. "Vanguard Media was a subcontractor. They terminated my employment, which legally terminated their access to my servers. I am protecting my business. Naomi reviewed everything. It is entirely legal, and they are the ones who will be facing a massive lawsuit." Patricia let out a harsh, dismissive scoff. "Oh, of course you dragged Naomi into this. Your brother David married a woman who loves nothing more than stirring up unnecessary corporate drama. You should not be listening to her. She is just trying to validate her exorbitant billing rates." "Naomi is protecting me," I fired back, anger finally breaking through my restraint. "Which is what a mother is supposed to do. A mother is supposed to teach her child how to behave in polite society," Patricia retorted viciously. "You are embarrassing yourself, Cassidy. You are embarrassing our family. You need to stop this ridiculous tantrum immediately. Call Diane right now, apologize for your behavior, and give Madison whatever passwords she needs to do her job. If you hand over the access, Diane promised she would take down the video and tell the club it was just a misunderstanding." I stared at the wall of my penthouse, completely stunned by the magnitude of her betrayal. Diane had not just mobilized the internet. She had weaponized my own mother against me. Diane knew exactly how desperate Patricia was for social validation. Diane had dangled a country club pardon in front of her, and Patricia had eagerly taken the bait, ready to sell out my billion-dollar enterprise just to keep her standing among a group of women who secretly despised her. "You want me to hand over the keys to a tech infrastructure that generates millions of dollars in revenue?" I stated slowly, enunciating every single word so there could be no confusion. Just so you can keep your spot on a summer gala planning committee. I want you to stop acting like a greedy, vindictive child. Patricia yelled, her mask of maternal guidance completely shattering. You are ruining everything. You will be blacklisted. Give them the passwords, Cassidy. I mean it. If you do not fix this right now, do not bother coming to Thanksgiving. I will not have my friends thinking I raised a criminal. The threat was supposed to break me. It was the ultimate emotional leverage she had wielded over my head since childhood. Comply or lose your family. Obey the wealthy or face isolation. But sitting in my penthouse wearing a crimson suit I bought with my own money, looking at an empire I built with my own hands, the threat suddenly felt incredibly pathetic. It was a hollow echo from a past I had already outgrown. I took a deep, steadying breath. The anxiety that Madison's video had sparked began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, impenetrable armor. You do not have to worry about Thanksgiving, Mother, I said, my voice eerily calm and resolute. Because I am not coming. Not this year, and not ever again. Excuse me, Patricia gasped, clearly shocked that I was not caving to her demands. You made your choice, I told her, feeling a massive weight lifting off my shoulders. You chose a country club over your own flesh and blood. You chose proximity to wealth over the truth. Diane is going to lose everything by the time this is over. Vanguard Media is going to crumble. And when those women at the club find out that you begged me to surrender my company to a sinking ship, they are not going to respect you. They are going to laugh at you. How dare you speak to me that way? Patricia sputtered, her outrage practically vibrating through the phone speaker. I am your mother. No, I replied softly. You are just a woman who gave birth to me. David and Naomi are my family. They stand by me when the fire starts. You just run to whoever holds the biggest bucket of water. We are done, Patricia. Do not call me again. I pulled the phone away from my ear before she could launch into another hysterical tirade. I pressed the red button to end the call. Then, with a single deliberate swipe of my thumb, I went into her contact settings and selected the option to block the caller. I set the phone down on the glass coffee table. The apartment was completely silent again. I had just severed ties with my biological mother, a moment that should have brought me to my knees in tears. Instead, I felt an overwhelming surge of liberation. The toxic cord was finally cut. I was no longer bound by the expectations of people who viewed my success as an inconvenience to their social climbing. I stood up from the sofa, squared my shoulders, and walked toward my office. Diane and Madison had played their internet games, and Patricia had played her emotional manipulation. It was time to show them what an actual corporate war looked like. I stepped across the threshold of my home office, the residual anger from my mother's phone call instantly replaced by razor-sharp focus. The 3 curved monitors on my desk were still glowing, displaying the inactive server logs of Vanguard Media. I sat down in my chair, cracked my knuckles, and prepared to draft a comprehensive timeline of the morning's events for Naomi. But before my fingers could even touch the keyboard, an urgent email notification popped onto my primary screen. It was not from my legal counsel. It was a Google alert I had set up years ago to monitor media mentions of my name in Vanguard Media. I clicked the alert. It redirected me to PR Newswire. My blood ran completely cold. Vanguard Media had just issued a formal syndicated press release. It was blasting out to every major financial and technology news outlet across the United States. I read the headline, my eyes scanning the bold black text. Vanguard Media announces executive restructuring following internal investigation into ethics violations. I felt a sickening drop in my stomach as I read the body of the text. Diane had not stopped at a tearful Instagram video. She had authorized an official corporate statement explicitly naming me. The press release stated that my employment had been terminated effective immediately due to severe systemic ethics violations and gross financial misconduct discovered during a routine internal audit. It praised Madison as the new ethically transparent vice president, who was stepping in to correct the toxic culture I had supposedly fostered. They were publicly branding me a corporate criminal. My office phone rang. It was Naomi. I answered it immediately, putting her on speakerphone. "Tell me you are reading the PR Newswire blast," Naomi said, her voice completely devoid of its usual amusement. She sounded like a general surveying a battlefield. "I am reading it right now," I replied, scrolling down the page. "They are accusing me of gross financial misconduct. They are putting this on the permanent public record. Refresh your browser and check the tech blogs," Naomi instructed, the urgency in her tone accelerating. Diane and Madison did not just send a press release. They leaked supporting documents to a friendly journalist at the Chicago Tech Tribune. The journalist just published an exclusive breaking news article 10 minutes ago. "I'm sending you the link right now." An incoming message chimed on my screen. I clicked the link Naomi provided. The article featured a massive, unflattering photo of me taken at a charity gala last year, juxtaposed against the Vanguard media logo. The headline accused me of funneling corporate funds into a secret offshore shell company. But the most damning part of the article was embedded in the center of the page. The journalist had uploaded screenshots of internal Vanguard emails, supposedly written by me, directing the accounting department to wire Vanguard funds directly into the private accounts of Apex Solutions LLC. I stared at the screenshots, my mind racing to comprehend the sheer audacity of the lie. The emails had my signature block. They had my exact corporate email address. They were dated from 3 months ago. They detailed a complex embezzlement scheme, making it look like Apex was not a legally contracted vendor, but a fraudulent shell corporation I created to steal from Richard and Diane. "Naomi, these are completely fabricated," I said, my voice rising in disbelief. "I never wrote these. Apex was paid through a highly documented, legally binding vendor payout system approved by Richard himself. These emails show me ordering illicit wire transfers." "I know they are fabricated," Naomi replied, the sound of her typing furiously echoing through the phone. "Diane and Madison forged them. They logged into the Vanguard administrative server, created spoofed emails using your digital credentials, and backdated them to look like a paper trail of embezzlement. They handed forged documents to the press to justify their illegal termination and cover up the fact that they locked themselves out of their own revenue stream." The gravity of the situation slammed into me. This was no longer just a civil contract dispute over vendor access and wrongful termination. This was criminal. "They just crossed a massive legal line," I stated, staring at the fabricated screenshots. "They are accusing me of a felony." "They are committing a felony to accuse you of a felony," Naomi corrected sharply. "Forging internal corporate communications to destroy a former employee's reputation and business prospects crosses the line into criminal defamation, wire fraud, and identity theft." Diane is panicked. She knows Richard is demanding answers, and she knows Gideon is threatening to walk away. She fabricated a paper trail of embezzlement so she can tell her husband and her clients that she had to fire you to save the company. She is using the press to legitimize her lie. But the metadata, I realized aloud, my technical background kicking in. If they forged these emails this afternoon, the metadata on the Vanguard Exchange servers will show the exact time and IP address of the creation. It will show that the emails were generated by Madison or Diane today, not by me 3 months ago. "Exactly," Naomi confirmed, her tone turning lethal. "They think because they own the company, they can just type up a fake email, take a screenshot, and hand it to a journalist. They do not understand how digital forensics work. They left a massive glowing digital footprint on their own servers proving their fraud. But Diane is the system administrator right now." I pointed out, a new wave of anxiety hitting me. If she realizes her mistake, or if Vanguard's in-house counsel warns her about the metadata, she can go into the server and wipe the exchange history. She can permanently delete the digital evidence proving the forgery. If she deletes the back-end logs, it becomes my word against hers in a public smear campaign. I will not let her delete anything, Naomi stated, the absolute certainty in her voice grounding me. We are elevating this from a civil dispute to a federal evidence preservation protocol. We have them trapped in their own lie, Cassidy. They handed us the rope and now we are going to tie the knot. What do we do? I asked, my hands gripping the edge of my desk. We lock down their servers, Naomi said. I am drafting the legal paperwork right now. Get your server logs ready. We are going to war. I kept the phone on speaker as my hands flew across the keyboard. My fingers executed commands with pure muscle memory. I compiled the back-end authentication logs extracting the exact timestamps, IP addresses, and user credentials that proved Apex Solutions, LLC, operated entirely independent of Vanguard Media accounts. I isolated the data showing Madison repeatedly failing to breach our firewalls that very morning. I encrypted the file and sent it directly to Naomi. On the other end of the line, Naomi was moving with terrifying speed. She was drafting a formal spoliation letter. For those outside the corporate litigation sphere, a spoliation letter is a legal death trap. It is a formal, legally binding mandate demanding the absolute preservation of all electronic evidence. Once a company receives it, their IT department must immediately freeze all servers, hard drives, and cloud backups. If a single email metadata tag or digital footprint is deleted after that letter is served, it ceases to be a simple civil dispute. It becomes the intentional destruction of evidence, which is a federal crime punishable by severe prison time. Naomi did not just email the letter to Harrison Cole. She deployed a localized digital strike. She served the mandate simultaneously to Vanguard's entire executive board, their external auditors, and the chief director of their IT department. Diane and Madison had foolishly assumed they could control the narrative by hitting send on a fake press release. They did not realize Naomi had just locked the doors to the room they were standing in and handed the keys to a federal judge. I am looking at the delivery confirmations right now, Naomi announced, the fierce satisfaction echoing in her voice. The IT director just opened the document. Harrison just opened it. Your former boss is currently staring down the barrel of a federal mandate. If Diane tries to delete those forged emails to cover her tracks, I said, leaning back in my chair and staring at the ceiling, she will trigger an automated alert on her own frozen servers. Exactly, Naomi confirmed. Diane is boxed in. She fabricated those embezzlement emails to justify firing you, but the metadata embedded in those files proves she created them today. If she leaves them on the server, the forensic audit will prove she committed criminal defamation and wire fraud. If she deletes them, she commits felony evidence tampering. She is completely trapped in her own web of lies. I thanked my sister-in-law, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for her brilliant legal mind. We disconnected the call, leaving me alone in the quiet hum of my home office. The media storm was still raging outside. My name was still being dragged through the mud on every public relations blog in the city, but the panic had completely vanished. I was sitting on a ticking time bomb of digital evidence, and all I had to do was wait for the explosion. My cell phone lit up on the desk. The caller ID displayed an encrypted international routing number. I did not recognize it, but given the sheer magnitude of the corporate fallout, I could not afford to ignore it. I picked up the device and answered with a crisp, professional greeting. A deep, resonant voice replied, skipping any polite introductions. The press release claims you were embezzling funds into an offshore shell company. I sat up straight, instantly recognizing the voice. It was Gideon, the tech billionaire, the anchor of my entire portfolio, and the man who currently held Vanguard Media's financial future in his hands. I did not embezzle a single dime, I stated firmly, offering no apologies or panicked defenses. Apex Solutions, LLC, is a fully compliant, domestically registered vendor entity. I built it specifically to protect your data from Vanguard's toxic financial liabilities. The emails they provided to the press are poorly executed forgeries generated this afternoon. A low rumbling chuckle vibrated through the phone speaker. I know they are forgeries. Cassidy Gideon replied, his tone laced with absolute contempt for Diane's stupidity. I run the largest cybersecurity conglomerate in North America. My team analyzed the screenshots embedded in that ridiculous article 10 minutes ago. The formatting of the headers is wrong, and the routing sequence does not match the internal architecture of your standard communications. Besides, I do not hire careless executives. If you were actually stealing money, you would have been smart enough not to leave a glaring paper trail on a subcontractor's exchange server. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. Gideon saw right through the smear campaign. He respected competence above all else, and Diane's desperate attempt at framing me was an insult to his intelligence. Madison Kensington attempted to run my quarterly review meeting today. Gideon continued, his voice hardening into a sharp edge. She stared at a blank screen, stammered through a fabricated excuse about a system outage, and lied directly to my face about your whereabouts. I do not tolerate liars, and I certainly do not tolerate nepotism hires playing games with my data. My servers are completely secure, I assured him. I severed Vanguard's access the moment my employment was officially terminated. Your proprietary analytics remain exclusively under Apex control. Excellent, Gideon said, the single word carrying the weight of a massive corporate endorsement. Vanguard Media is currently drowning in a public relations disaster of their own making. They are attempting to project strength and stability to the market. Tomorrow evening is their annual industry gala. Richard is flying back from Scotland to host it. They are expecting me to attend and publicly renew my contracts to stop their stock from plummeting into oblivion. The annual industry gala was the crown jewel of Diane's social calendar. It was a massive, opulent event hosted at the Field Museum designed to flaunt Vanguard's elite client list to every major investor in Chicago. Diane had undoubtedly planned to use the gala to officially crown Madison as the new vice president. I am attending the gala tomorrow night, Gideon announced smoothly. And I require an official guest. Since Vanguard Media seems to have misplaced their most valuable executive, I believe it is only appropriate that the CEO of Apex Solutions accompanies me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Gideon was not just offering me a ticket inside the building. He was offering me a grand entrance on the arm of the very billionaire Diane was desperately trying to appease. It was the ultimate power move. Buy a new dress, Cassidy Gideon instructed, the quiet authority in his voice, leaving no room for argument. Make it something memorable. My driver will collect you at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. We are going to walk the red carpet together, and we are going to show the Kensington family exactly what happens when they insult our intelligence. I will be ready, I promised, a fierce, triumphant smile breaking across my face. The call disconnected. I stood up from my desk, the adrenaline surging through my veins. Diane thought she had ruined my reputation. Instead, she had just handed me the keys to her complete and utter destruction. I immediately dialed Naomi. She answered with the crisp background noise of her busy law firm echoing behind her. Gideon just called, I told her, pacing across the hardwood floor of my penthouse living room. He knows the emails are forged. He wants me as his +1 to the Vanguard Annual Industry Gala tomorrow night. A sharp intake of breath came through the receiver, followed instantly by a rich, predatory laugh. Naomi was in her element. While you were managing the server kill switch and dealing with your mother, I was analyzing Vanguard's public debt filings. Naomi explained, her voice dropping into a thrilling, conspiratorial cadence. Richard took out a massive commercial loan 3 years ago to keep the lights on and fund his wife's extravagant corporate redesigns. He used their future accounts receivable as collateral. Specifically, he used the projected revenue from the tech sector, the exact accounts receivable that you just legally vaporized. I stopped pacing. Vanguard is in technical default. I realized, my mind rapidly assembling the pieces of the financial puzzle. They are bleeding out on the operating table, Naomi confirmed with ruthless satisfaction. Their primary lender saw the stock plummet today. They saw the social media chaos Madison created. The bank is absolutely panicked because they know Vanguard just lost their only profitable sector, so I reached out to Gideon's chief financial officer. We spent the last 4 hours executing a shadow maneuver. Using the guaranteed revenue from your exclusive Apex contracts, we approached the bank and negotiated to purchase Vanguard's distressed corporate debt. We bought it for pennies on the dollar. My heart hammered against my ribs. I am buying their debt. You already bought it, Naomi corrected sharply. The paperwork clears tomorrow at exactly 5 in the afternoon, precisely 2 hours before the gala red carpet opens. You are not just a former employee anymore, Cassidy. You are about to become their primary creditor. You own them. The magnitude of the strike left me temporarily speechless. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of tactical precision and highly classified legal maneuvering. Meanwhile, across the city, Diane was busy orchestrating her own elaborate delusion. According to my former colleagues who were still trapped in the Vanguard offices, the atmosphere was a toxic mixture of blind panic and arrogant denial. Richard was currently on a private jet flying back from Scotland, furious and demanding a flawless public relations spin upon his arrival. Diane was treating the upcoming gala at the Field Museum like a royal coronation. She had commissioned a massive stage setup beneath the towering dinosaur exhibits and drafted an arrogant press release outlining a major corporate restructuring. Her plan was blatantly transparent. She intended to parade Madison in front of their wealthiest investors, confidently announcing her daughter as the new vice president, while spinning my termination as a necessary purge of a rogue element. Diane genuinely believed that projecting absolute unwavering authority would calm the panicked market and force Gideon to return to the negotiating table out of sheer habit. She fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the predators she was swimming with. Evening approached rapidly. I stood in my master bedroom staring at the garment bag delivered earlier that afternoon. Gideon had explicitly told me to buy a new dress to make it memorable and commanding. I did not hold back. I chose a floor-length gown in a deep, striking emerald green. The garment was entirely architectural, featuring sharp, clean lines that projected absolute power and zero compromise. It was armor forged from heavy silk and supreme confidence. I paired it with minimalist diamond jewelry and swept my hair back into a sleek, severe style. I did not look like a woman who had spent the last 2 days being cyberbullied by a 23-year-old. I looked like a conqueror. Naomi arrived at my penthouse an hour before Gideon's private driver was scheduled to collect me. She walked in carrying a sleek black briefcase looking absolutely flawless, in a tailored midnight blue pantsuit. Her presence alone made me feel invincible. As a brilliant corporate litigator and my fiercely protective sister-in-law, she had guided me through the darkest hours of this corporate warfare. She set the briefcase on my glass coffee table and clicked the heavy brass latches open. The transfer is officially complete, Naomi announced, pulling out a stack of dense legal contracts bound in a thick leather folio. The bank sold the commercial note. Apex Solutions, LLC, is now the sole holder of Vanguard Media's primary corporate debt. They owe you $40 million payable immediately due to their catastrophic breach of the revenue covenants. I sat on the edge of the sofa and ran my fingers over the crisp paper. I stared at the bank signatures that essentially handed me the keys to Richard and Diane's entire livelihood. 5 years of working 80-hour weeks, of missing holidays, of swallowing endless insults from a woman who thought I was nothing but disposable peasant labor had led to this exact document. They tried to destroy my professional reputation with forged emails and vicious social media smear campaigns. They tried to take my life's work and hand it to a girl who barely knew how to operate a spreadsheet. Now I held their financial execution warrant in the palm of my hands. They are going to the gala tonight thinking they survived the storm, Naomi said softly, standing beside me and looking down at the finalized contracts. Diane thinks she outsmarted you with her press release. Richard thinks his family legacy is safe. Madison thinks she is a brilliant self-made executive. They have no idea the ground beneath their feet is already gone. I picked up the heavy leather folio and slid it carefully into my designer clutch. It barely fit, but it was the only accessory that truly mattered tonight. They are walking into a slaughterhouse, I replied, feeling a profound, icy calm settle over my racing heart. And they bought the tickets themselves. We walked out to the elevator together. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was a text message from Gideon's private driver announcing his arrival in the secured parking garage downstairs. The game board was perfectly set. Every single piece was in position. Diane and Madison had spent the last 48 hours tearing down my name to build their fragile glass castle. Tonight, I was bringing the hammer. The extended Lincoln Navigator glided through the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. Sitting in the plush leather interior, I watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows. Gideon sat across from me, a picture of absolute relaxed power in a bespoke black tuxedo. Naomi sat beside me, her midnight blue suit radiating lethal confidence. The silence in the vehicle was not tense. It was the calm before a very calculated storm. Gideon poured 3 glasses of sparkling water from the sleek console, handing one to me and one to Naomi. He raised his glass in a silent toast to the evening ahead. I took a sip, feeling the cold liquid ground me. We pulled up to the magnificent, imposing facade of the Field Museum. Massive floodlights illuminated the classical stone pillars, cutting through the freezing winter night. Vanguard Media had spared absolutely no expense for this display of corporate vanity. A sprawling red carpet stretched from the curb all the way up the grand marble steps. Behind velvet ropes, a swarm of local business reporters, paparazzi, and industry photographers jostled for position. Diane had intentionally invited the press to document her triumph and showcase her daughter's fraudulent ascension. She wanted the world to watch Vanguard Media enter its new, supposedly purified era. She had no idea she had just invited an audience to her own execution. The chauffeur opened the heavy door. Gideon stepped out first, instantly commanding the attention of every camera in the vicinity. Flashbulbs erupted in a blinding, chaotic wave. Then he turned and offered me his hand. I took it, stepping out of the luxurious vehicle and planting my stiletto heels firmly onto the red carpet. My emerald green gown caught the flashing lights, the architectural silk moving with heavy, deliberate grace. Naomi stepped out right behind me, her presence flanking me like a brilliant, impenetrable shield. The moment the press recognized my face, the organized red carpet descended into absolute pandemonium. Reporters shoved their microphones over the velvet ropes, shouting questions that overlapped into a deafening roar. They wanted blood. They wanted the sensationalized villain Madison had created on social media. They screamed questions about the forged press release, asking if I was facing federal charges for cyber extortion, demanding to know if I had stolen millions in client funds. I did not flinch. I did not hide my face or rush up the stairs. I kept my chin perfectly level, maintaining a cool, untouchable smile. Naomi walked at my left, her gaze sweeping over the aggressive reporters with terrifying indifference. Gideon walked at my right, keeping his hand lightly resting on the small of my back, a physical manifestation of his absolute endorsement. We moved up the marble steps at a measured, regal pace. Let them take their photos. Let them document the emerald dress and the diamond jewelry. Tomorrow morning, these exact images would accompany a very different set of headlines. We reached the top of the stairs and glided through the towering brass doors into the museum's grand foyer. The space was breathtaking, dominated by soaring vaulted ceilings, and the massive, iconic dinosaur skeleton holding court in the center of the room. Hundreds of Chicago's wealthiest investors, corporate executives, and socialites mingled around high-top tables, sipping premium champagne. A string quartet played softly in the background. It was a perfectly orchestrated illusion of corporate stability. It took exactly 30 seconds for the illusion to shatter. Diane was standing near the entrance to the main ballroom holding court with a circle of elite venture capitalists. She wore a shimmering silver gown that dripped with excess. Madison stood right beside her, giggling and posing for a photographer wearing a sash that might as well have said nepotism. Diane turned her head to greet a new arrival, and her eyes locked dead onto mine. The crystal champagne flute in her hand slipped, spilling expensive liquor onto the polished marble floor. Her face transformed from aristocratic charm to raw, unadulterated fury. She whispered something frantic to Madison, whose smile instantly vanished, replaced by wide-eyed panic. Diane did not hesitate. She snapped her fingers aggressively in the air, signaling the head of the private security detail stationed near the coat check. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my chest. She raised her voice intentionally, drawing the attention of the surrounding billionaires. She demanded that security remove me from the premises, immediately calling me a hostile trespasser and a corporate criminal who was actively under federal investigation. 4 broad-shouldered security guards in dark suits moved swiftly to intercept us, forming a human wall between my group and the entrance to the ballroom. The lead guard held up his hand politely but firmly, asking me to turn around and exit the building. The string quartet seemed to falter. The elegant chatter of the surrounding executives died down into a tense, electrifying silence. Everyone was watching. Diane marched forward, her silver gown rustling aggressively. She stopped behind the security wall, her eyes blazing with desperate hatred. She told the guards I was a deranged former employee who had been fired for gross financial misconduct. She commanded them to throw me out onto the street before I endangered her guests. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, Gideon stepped smoothly in front of me. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. When a man worth $10 billion speaks, the world quiets down to listen. Gideon looked directly at the head of security and told him in a voice as cold as liquid nitrogen that if anyone laid a single finger on me, he would personally ensure the security firm was litigated into non-existence by morning. The guards froze instantly, recognizing the legendary tech magnate. Gideon then turned his lethal gaze onto Diane. He projected his voice so that every single venture capitalist investor and board member in the foyer could hear him with crystal clarity. He announced that I was not a trespasser. He declared that I was his personal invited VIP guest. Furthermore, he informed the breathless crowd that I was the lead strategic consultant for his entire global conglomerate. Diane turned a sickly, translucent shade of gray. Madison let out a pathetic, humiliated whimper, shrinking behind her mother. The surrounding elite peers began whispering furiously, their eyes darting between Diane's sudden loss of power and my emerald gown. Gideon coldly ordered Diane to step aside. She choked down her shattered pride, trembling with absolute humiliation, and forced the security guards to part. Naomi offered a brilliant, mocking smile as we walked right past the seething CEO's wife and stepped gracefully into the main ballroom, ready to take their entire empire to the ground. We stepped further into the magnificent Stanley Field Hall, the heart of the museum, where the towering dinosaur skeletons stood illuminated by dramatic uplighting. The main ballroom was a sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer gowns, a curated gathering of Chicago's most powerful financial players. Waitstaff glided through the crowd carrying silver trays of caviar and vintage champagne. Naomi, Gideon, and I bypassed the crowded bar and claimed a prime high-top table directly in front of the main stage. The energy in the room was palpable, humming with anxious whispers. Everyone had seen the catastrophic stock plunge that afternoon. They were waiting for an explanation. A sharp feedback whine from the sound system pierced the elegant chatter. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. All eyes turned toward the raised platform beneath the dinosaur exhibit. Richard stepped up to the acrylic podium. He had clearly rushed straight from the international airport to the museum. Despite wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, he looked completely disheveled. A visible sheen of sweat coated his forehead, reflecting the harsh glare of the stage lights. He gripped the edges of the podium so tightly, his knuckles turned white, attempting to project an aura of steady leadership that he fundamentally lacked. He cleared his throat, adjusting the microphone. "Good evening, distinguished guests, investors, and partners." Richard began, his voice wavering with a slight tremor. "Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate the enduring legacy of Vanguard Media. As you all know, the corporate landscape is constantly evolving. To remain at the absolute pinnacle of the public relations sector, we must occasionally make bold, decisive maneuvers to ensure our company remains agile and innovative. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water watching him sweat. Naomi leaned against the table, her arms crossed, a predator observing her prey. She was looking at the digital clock on her phone, calculating the exact seconds until our financial trap would spring. Earlier today, Richard continued wiping his brow with a silk handkerchief. We initiated a comprehensive corporate restructuring. We gracefully parted ways with some of our older management to pave the way for a dynamic, forward-thinking generation. It is my profound honor to officially introduce our new Vice President of Strategic Partnerships. She brings a fresh digital native perspective to our executive board. Please welcome my daughter, Madison. A solitary spotlight swung to the side of the stage where Madison stepped out wearing a heavily sequined dress. She offered a stiff, nervous wave to the crowd. The applause that followed was agonizingly polite. It was thin, scattered, and deeply skeptical. The venture capitalists in the room were not fools. They recognized blatant nepotism, especially when it coincided with a massive financial hemorrhage. Madison quickly retreated into the shadows, looking like a deer caught in headlights. She had spent the entire afternoon crying on social media about cyber extortion, and now she looked completely terrified of the wealthy audience she was supposed to command. Richard sensed the cold reception. He knew he was losing the room. Desperation crept into his posture. He leaned closer to the microphone, preparing to execute the reckless, fabricated spin that Diane had likely fed him over the phone. I know there have been baseless rumors circulating in the financial press this afternoon regarding our tech portfolio, Richard announced, forcing a wide, artificial smile. I want to personally assure every single investor in this room that Vanguard Media is stronger than ever. In fact, I am thrilled to announce that just hours ago, we successfully secured a renewed multi-year exclusive master service agreement with our largest tech partner. Our relationship with Gideon's global conglomerate is fully intact and expanding into new, unprecedented territories. The room erupted into relieved murmurs. A few investors actually clapped. Richard exhaled, his shoulders slumping with the false belief that his lie had saved his company. He was wrong. Gideon set his crystal glass down on our high-top table. The sharp clink cut through the applause. He adjusted the cuffs of his tuxedo, offered me a brief, respectful nod, and turned toward the center aisle. He did not shout. He did not run. He simply walked with the heavy, undeniable gravity of a man who controlled global markets. The crowd of elite executives naturally parted for him, stepping aside as if repelled by a magnetic force. Richard saw Gideon approaching the steps of the stage. The artificial smile vanished from the CEO's face, replaced by absolute visceral terror. Richard froze, paralyzed behind the podium, watching the billionaire ascend the stairs. Gideon stepped onto the platform. He did not ask for permission. He walked directly up to Richard, his towering frame dwarfing the sweating executive. Gideon extended his hand wordlessly, demanding the microphone. Richard, trembling and completely defeated, stepped aside and surrendered the podium. Gideon adjusted the microphone to his height. He looked out over the sea of silent, breathless investors. When he spoke, his deep, resonant voice commanded absolute authority. Good evening, Gideon stated, his tone as cold and unforgiving as a steel blade. My name is Gideon. I am the founder and CEO of the tech conglomerate Richard just referenced. I am stepping up here tonight to perform a necessary market correction because I do not tolerate executives who lie to their shareholders, and I absolutely do not tolerate companies that attempt to weaponize my brand to cover up their own gross incompetence. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The investors in the room did not hesitate. The glamorous gala instantly transformed into a frantic trading floor. Men and women in formal wear began furiously typing on their phones, instructing their brokers to dump any remaining Vanguard stock before the market opened the next morning. The financial bleeding was no longer a rumor. It was a confirmed catastrophic reality. Let me be unequivocally clear. Gideon continued, staring directly at the venture capitalists in the front row. My companies do not have a renewed contract with Vanguard Media. We do not have an expanding relationship. As of noon today, my executive board completely severed all ties, canceled all pending initiatives, and legally terminated every single vendor agreement associated with this agency. Vanguard Media represents a toxic liability plagued by severe ethical violations and staggering nepotism. I would not trust this leadership team to manage a lemonade stand, let alone my global public relations strategy. Richard collapsed into a chair at the back of the stage, burying his face in his hands. Diane let out a horrified shriek from the side of the room, her silver gown trembling as she watched her husband's legacy disintegrate in real time. But Gideon was not finished. He turned his piercing gaze toward the center of the room, looking directly at where Naomi and I were standing. Furthermore, Gideon announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. I want the market to know exactly where my capital is going. My conglomerate requires excellent security and unmatched strategic vision. That is why, moving forward, my companies have signed exclusive direct master service agreements with the only executive who actually ran this sinking ship. We are now officially partnering with Apex Solutions LLC and its brilliant founder, Cassidy. The entire ballroom whipped their heads around to look at me. The flashing cameras that had previously documented Diane's arrogance now pivoted entirely, bathing me in a blinding wave of light. I stood tall in my emerald gown, my expression perfectly composed, listening to the magnificent sound of Vanguard Media crashing straight into the ground. I stepped forward. The heavy silk of my emerald gown brushed against the polished floor as I moved toward the stage. The sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer dresses parted for me, a physical manifestation of the power dynamic shifting in real time. The flashing cameras traced my every step, capturing the exact moment the narrative flipped. I did not rush. I walked with the deliberate, measured pacing of a woman who had spent 5 years absorbing disrespect and was now arriving to collect her due. Gideon stood at the podium, a slight approving smile playing on his lips. As I reached the top of the stairs, he stepped aside and extended a hand, guiding me to the microphone. He was yielding the floor to the new authority in the room. I looked down at the audience. The absolute silence in the grand hall was deafening. Every billionaire, venture capitalist, and media correspondent was hanging on my next breath. I shifted my gaze to the back of the stage where Richard sat slumped in a chair, wiping his forehead with a trembling hand. Then I looked to the side of the room, locking eyes with Diane. Her face was contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Madison was clutching her mother's arm, finally understanding that her social media performance had summoned a leviathan she could not fight. "Good evening," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive hall. "As Gideon just clarified, my name is Cassidy. Up until this morning, I was the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships for Vanguard Media. I am also the sole proprietor and CEO of Apex Solutions LLC. I let the name of my company hang in the air for a fraction of a second before continuing. Earlier today, Vanguard Media issued a syndicated press release accusing me of gross financial misconduct. They leaked forged internal emails to the press claiming I embezzled corporate funds. They attempted to brand me a criminal to cover up their own staggering administrative failures. My legal counsel, Naomi, who is standing right there in the front row, has already filed an emergency spoliation hold on Vanguard's internal servers. The digital forensics will easily prove that the current executive suite fabricated those documents this very afternoon. The federal authorities will handle that criminal defamation in due time. A wave of shocked whispers rolled through the audience. Investors glared at Richard, realizing they had been lied to on a federal scale. The board members in the front row began furiously whispering to their respective legal teams. But we are not here to discuss desperate criminal acts. I continued, projecting absolute calm. We are here to discuss business. We are here to discuss leverage. 5 years ago, Vanguard Media was on the verge of bankruptcy. They were legally disqualified from signing contracts with major tech conglomerates due to their toxic financial liabilities. To bypass that restriction and save this firm, I legally established Apex Solutions as a pristine independent entity. Gideon signed with my company. My company subcontracted the daily operations back to Vanguard. Vanguard never owned those clients. They merely rented access to them, and that access was legally tethered to my continued employment. I turned slightly, ensuring my voice carried directly to Diane. She was shrinking back against a display case, her silver gown trembling. When I was publicly fired in the lobby this morning to make room for a nepotism hire, Vanguard legally severed its own sub-vendor agreement. I did not hack your servers. I did not commit cyber terrorism. I simply took my property and walked out the door. The moment you took my badge, you unplugged your own life support. Diane looked like she might physically collapse. She gripped a cocktail table to steady herself, the reality of her arrogant blunder crushing the breath out of her lungs. Madison looked back and forth between the stage and her mother, the panic in her eyes magnified by the glaring camera flashes. But taking my clients was merely the first step, I announced, raising the stakes. The ballroom grew even quieter, if that was possible. The atmosphere was charged with high-voltage anticipation. I understand corporate finance just as well as I understand public relations, I explained to the captivated audience. Vanguard Media operates on a massive line of commercial credit. 3 years ago, the CEO took out a staggering corporate loan to fund extravagant office renovations and sustain an unsustainable executive lifestyle. He used the projected revenue from the tech sector portfolio as the primary collateral for that commercial note, the exact tech portfolio that legally belonged to Apex Solutions. I paused, letting the financial elite in the room connect the dots. I could see the venture capitalists nodding in sudden terrifying realization. They knew exactly how banking covenants worked. When collateral vanishes, the loans get called in. When the market saw the sudden dashboard blackouts today, and when Gideon's team initiated their breach of contract protocols, Vanguard's primary lenders panicked. I said, my voice cutting through the hall like a diamond cutter. They realized the collateral backing their massive commercial loan had just legally evaporated. Vanguard Media instantly dropped into technical default. The bank was desperate to offload the distressed debt before the market opened tomorrow. I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out the heavy folded legal document Naomi had given me earlier that evening. I held it up for the entire room to see. The thick parchment represented absolute financial ruin for the people who had mocked me. My legal counsel spent the afternoon negotiating directly with your lenders. I revealed, feeling the ultimate thrill of the checkmate. Using the guaranteed exclusive revenue from my renewed contracts with Gideon's global conglomerate, Apex Solutions executed a leveraged buyout of your defaulted commercial paper. We purchased your corporate debt for pennies on the dollar. The transaction cleared wire processing exactly 2 hours ago. I turned my head and looked directly into Richard's defeated, bloodshot eyes. Then I shifted my gaze back to Diane, watching her pristine aristocratic facade shatter into a million jagged pieces. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum waiting for the final strike. I do not work for you anymore. I announced, the words ringing out with absolute devastating clarity. As of 5 o'clock this afternoon, I am your primary creditor. You work for me. The delivery was flawless. The impact was nuclear. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath for one suspended moment of pure corporate shock before the reality of the takeover sunk in. I stood on the stage, the heavy silk of my emerald gown glowing under the spotlights, holding the document that legally stripped Richard and Diane of their entire empire. I had not just defeated them. I had bought them. The silence shattered. It did not just break. It exploded into a deafening roar of overlapping shouts, camera flashes, and the frantic clicking of expensive leather shoes against the marble floor. The paparazzi stationed near the entrance pushed against the velvet ropes, desperate to capture the exact look of devastation painting the faces of the Vanguard Media executive family. I stood completely still on the stage, the heavy portfolio resting comfortably in my hands. Beside me, Gideon offered a slow, satisfied nod, stepping slightly back to let me absorb the absolute magnitude of the moment. Down in the front row, Naomi flashed a brilliant, dangerous smile, her phone already buzzing with confirmation emails from the banking syndicates. We had executed a flawless corporate checkmate. Richard remained paralyzed in his chair at the back of the platform. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. The reality of his financial execution was sinking in, dismantling his reality piece by piece. He looked at me then, at the thick legal document I held, and finally his bloodshot eyes snapped toward his wife. The timeline of the day's catastrophic events suddenly aligned in his mind. He realized that I did not sabotage his company unprovoked. He realized that the stock crash, the locked dashboards, the furious billionaires, and the defaulted commercial loans were all triggered by a single arrogant decision made in his lobby at 8 o'clock this morning. Richard pushed himself out of the chair. He did not walk toward me to negotiate or beg. He bypassed me entirely and stormed down the stage steps, charging directly toward Diane. He completely abandoned any pretense of aristocratic composure. The facade of the wealthy, untouchable chief executive dissolved, leaving only a desperate, ruined man, realizing his legacy had just been incinerated. Diane shrank back against a cocktail table, her silver gown shimmering as she trembled. She held up her hands in a futile attempt to pacify the furious man advancing on her. "What did you do?" Richard roared, his voice booming over the chaotic chatter of the fleeing investors. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched white collar. He did not care that a dozen financial reporters were recording his meltdown on their smartphones. He did not care about the optics or the elite audience watching them. "What did you do to my company, Diane?" "Richard, please keep your voice down," Diane hissed, her eyes darting around the room in absolute panic. "We can fix this. She is lying. We will call the corporate lawyers in the morning and sort out the vendor contracts. It is just a misunderstanding. There is no company left to fix," Richard screamed, grabbing the edge of the cocktail table and flipping it over. Crystal champagne flutes shattered against the floor, sending guests jumping backward to avoid the flying glass. "You fired the only person keeping us solvent. You fired the literal owner of our client infrastructure so you could give a corner office to our completely unqualified daughter. You handed a $40 million commercial note to a woman who just proved she is 10 times smarter than both of us combined. My father built this agency from the ground up, and you destroyed it before lunchtime because of your pathetic, petty jealousy." Diane choked on a sob, the reality of her social and financial demise finally breaking through her narcissism. "I was protecting us," she cried, her voice pitching into a hysterical screech. "She was getting too powerful. She was making us look foolish in our own building. I had to show her who was in charge. I even had the IT team fabricate those embezzlement emails to ensure she could never work in this city again. I did it for our family." "You committed a federal crime," Richard bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You forged digital documents while we are under an active legal hold. You did not protect our family, Diane. You bought us a one-way ticket to federal prison. I am filing for divorce the second I leave this building, and I am telling the authorities exactly who authorized those fraudulent press releases. I will not go down for your staggering incompetence." While her parents tore each other apart in front of Chicago's elite, Madison was having a spectacular meltdown of her own. She stood a few feet away, clutching her sequined dress, her phone gripped tightly in her hand. The comments on her fabricated social media videos were already changing tone. The truth about the gala was leaking online in real time. Influencers and journalists who had offered her sympathy just hours ago were now publicly mocking her. The hashtag demanding my arrest had been rapidly replaced by one exposing her fraudulent nepotism and digital lies. Madison let out a piercing, dramatic wail. She stomped her foot against the marble floor, completely losing whatever shred of professional dignity she had attempted to project. "Mom, you promised me this would work," Madison screamed, pointing an accusing finger at Diane. "You said I was going to be the vice president. You said Cassidy was just a disposable assistant. Now everyone on the internet is calling me a fraud. My entire reputation is ruined." I cannot even show my face at the club. You ruined my life." Diane reached out for her daughter, desperate to comfort her, but Madison slapped her mother's hand away. "I do not want to be the vice president of a bankrupt company." Madison sobbed, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. "I do not want to work for her." She glared up at the stage, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I hate you. You are a horrible, toxic person." I looked down at the 23-year-old girl throwing a tantrum in a multi-million-dollar museum. I did not feel angry. I did not even feel vindictive. I just felt a profound sense of pity for someone so completely detached from reality. I stepped up to the edge of the stage, looking directly into Madison's tear-stained eyes. "You do not have to worry about working for me, Madison," I said, my voice carrying effortlessly over the remaining crowd, "because you are grossly unqualified, and your position has been permanently eliminated. You and your mother have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises before my security team escorts you out." It took exactly 7 days for the legal and financial reality of the gala to completely solidify. Vanguard Media, once a towering institution of Chicago public relations, was now officially operating under the strict receivership of Apex Solutions, LLC. I drove my Audi down the familiar stretch of Michigan Avenue, the morning sun reflecting off the frost-covered skyscrapers. The city felt different today, buzzing with a sharp energy that perfectly matched my own. I was making the exact same commute I had made a week ago, navigating the same traffic and looking at the same architectural landmarks, but the power dynamic had inverted completely. I was no longer a stressed employee rushing to appease a volatile executive team. I was the primary debt holder, arriving to liquidate their assets, audit their remaining accounts, and restructure the top-tier talent. The transition of power was absolute and legally binding. Naomi had spent the week systematically dismantling Richard and Diane's corporate defenses. The forged emails had been handed over to federal investigators, prompting an immediate inquiry into criminal defamation and wire fraud. Richard, desperate to save his own skin and his remaining personal wealth, had filed for divorce the very morning after the gala, legally separating himself from Diane's reckless actions. The board of directors had formally dissolved the executive suite to avoid further liability and handed the operational reins to the restructuring committee. Vanguard Media was now a hollow shell, and I held the deed. I pulled into the underground parking garage, bypassing my old assigned spot and pulling directly into the sprawling space marked Chief Executive Officer. I stepped out of the car wearing a tailored charcoal suit that projected quiet, unyielding authority. I carried my leather briefcase containing the restructuring blueprints, the new operational hierarchy, and the severance packages for the few redundant management roles that had enabled Diane's toxic culture. As I rode the elevator up from the parking garage to the main lobby, I felt a profound sense of calm wash over me. There was no anxiety, no lingering imposter syndrome, and absolutely no fear of Diane's country club connections. The digital guillotine had fallen, the market had spoken, and the dust had settled. I walked through the polished glass doors of the main lobby, stepping onto the pristine marble floor with a measured, deliberate pace. The morning rush was visually identical to the day I was fired. Executives carried coffees and junior coordinators rushed toward the elevators with thick project files. But as I walked toward the security turnstiles, the atmosphere shifted drastically. People stopped and stared, parting to create a clear, unobstructed path for me. They knew exactly who I was now. I approached the main security desk. Standing there holding a cheap cardboard banker's box filled with desk accessories and framed photos was Madison. Diane stood next to her, clutching a designer handbag, her face flushed with an ugly, indignant rage. They were attempting to bypass the turnstiles. The exact same security guard who had confiscated my badge a week prior stood firm, physically blocking their path. He held a printed memo on a clipboard, his expression a mixture of strict professional duty and deep discomfort. I listened as Diane shrieked at the man demanding access to the executive suite to retrieve her personal items. The guard politely informed her that her access had been permanently revoked by the restructuring committee and that building management would safely mail any remaining personal effects to her residential address. Diane slammed her hand against the marble desk, threatening to have the guard fired immediately. She had completely forgotten that she no longer had the authority to fire anyone. Her threats were empty echoes of a power she had lost the moment she tried to steal my company. Madison was crying silently, her face buried in her hands, the weight of her public humiliation still crushing her. She had lost her unearned title, her social standing, and her pristine reputation in a single evening. The internet had not forgotten her fabricated video, and the intense public backlash had forced her to permanently delete all her social media accounts. I walked up to the security desk, stopping just a few feet away from the two women who had tried to destroy my life. Diane whipped her head around, her eyes locking onto mine. Her chest heaved and her hands curled into tight fists. She braced herself for the impact. She expected me to gloat. She anticipated a vicious screaming confrontation where I rubbed my massive victory in her face. She wanted me to call her names, to mock her ruined marriage, and to laugh openly at her daughter's tears. She wanted a dramatic fight because a fight meant she still mattered. A fight meant I still viewed her as an equal adversary. I did not give her a fight. I did not give her a single word of validation. I looked at Diane, my expression completely blank, devoid of any anger, triumph, or malice. I offered her a polite, indifferent nod, the exact kind of passing nod one gives a stranger holding the door at a grocery store. It was a gesture of absolute chilling dismissal. I watched the realization shatter her ego in real time. The sheer indifference was a lethal weapon. It communicated clearly that she was no longer a threat, no longer a rival, and no longer relevant to my existence. She was just a civilian standing in my lobby, making an embarrassing scene over a cardboard box. The color drained entirely from her face, and her shoulders slumped. The fight evaporated from her posture, replaced by the crushing weight of total irrelevance. The security guard looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I gave him a reassuring smile, affirming his actions, and stepped up to the VIP turnstile. I pressed my new master access keycard against the scanner. A soft chime echoed in the quiet lobby, and the glass barrier opened smoothly. I walked through, leaving Diane and Madison standing on the wrong side of the glass. I did not look back. I strode toward the private executive elevator, ready to step into the boardroom and rebuild the empire from the ashes they had left behind. 6 weeks after I officially took the helm of Vanguard Media, the dust had finally settled into a highly profitable rhythm. I spent my days restructuring the remaining talent, promoting the associates who had actually done the heavy lifting during Diane's reign of terror, and expanding the Apex Solutions portfolio into global markets. I was no longer running on adrenaline and vengeance. I was operating on pure, unadulterated momentum. It was a Friday evening, and I had just returned to my penthouse, slipping off my heels and pouring a glass of sparkling water. The quiet luxury of my home was a sanctuary I had earned through blood, sweat, and ironclad contracts. I was looking forward to a peaceful night when the intercom on my wall chimed with a sharp, jarring tone. I pressed the button. The building's head concierge spoke through the speaker, his voice laced with professional hesitation. He informed me that a woman claiming to be my mother was waiting in the lobby. She was insisting on coming up, demanding he bypass the standard security protocol because it was a family celebration. I closed my eyes, letting out a long, slow breath. Patricia had finally realized which way the wind was blowing. She had seen the industry profiles and the massive shift in Chicago's corporate hierarchy. I could have told the concierge to turn her away, but doing so would leave a thread hanging. I needed to cut it myself. I instructed the concierge to grant her access to the private elevator. I did not change out of my tailored trousers or put on a welcoming smile. I stood perfectly still in the center of my expansive living room, waiting for the heavy oak door to open. When it did, Patricia swept into the foyer like she owned the building. She was holding a massive, extravagantly wrapped gift box and a bottle of vintage champagne. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a cashmere wrap that screamed desperate suburban wealth. The moment she saw me, her face broke into a wide, theatrical smile that did not reach her eyes. She rushed forward, arms extended, acting as though our last conversation had never happened. "Cassidy, darling," Patricia cooed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I am so incredibly proud of you. Look at this place. Look at everything you have accomplished. You are a millionaire CEO. I always knew you were destined for absolute greatness." I did not step forward to accept her embrace. I stood my ground, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, watching her performance with cold clinical detachment. Patricia stopped a few feet away, her smile faltering slightly at my icy reception. She lowered her arms, shifting the heavy gift box awkwardly against her hip. "I brought you a little something to celebrate," she continued, attempting to push past the awkwardness with sheer volume. "Everyone at the country club has been talking about you. Beverly actually came up to me yesterday and apologized for doubting you. They are all just completely fascinated by how you took over Vanguard Media. I told them you got your brilliant business acumen from my side of the family. You told me to hand over my passwords to Diane so you would not lose your spot on a gala planning committee," I stated. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any anger or sorrow. It was the simple, indisputable truth. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Cassidy, that was weeks ago. I was just stressed. Mothers and daughters fight. It is completely normal. But we are family, and we have so much to celebrate now. We need to focus on the future. I was thinking we could host a small cocktail party here next weekend to properly introduce your new title to my friends." I looked at her desperate, grasping need for validation and proximity to power. She did not care about the corporate sabotage or the fact that Diane had tried to destroy my entire life. Patricia only cared that I was now holding the winning hand. "There will be no cocktail party, Patricia," I said, using her first name to sever any remaining maternal illusion. "You are not bringing your country club friends to my home. You are not going to use my success as a social currency. When the fire was burning, you handed Diane the gasoline. You chose her wealth over my survival. The only reason you are standing in my penthouse right now is because I hold the checkbook." Patricia's face flushed a deep, ugly red. The faux maternal warmth vanished, replaced by bitter, defensive hostility. "I am your mother," she snapped, clutching the champagne bottle tightly. "You owe me respect. You cannot just cut me out of your life now that you are wealthy. I raised you. You provided basic biological functions and then spent 33 years undermining my confidence to serve your own ego." I corrected her, my tone absolute and unyielding. "You lost the right to call yourself my mother the second you told me to surrender my company to save your social calendar. Take your gift, take your champagne, walk back into that elevator, and do not ever return to this building. You are no longer welcome in my life." She stared at me, searching my face for any sign of hesitation. She found absolutely nothing. Patricia swallowed hard, her shoulders sagging as the reality of my boundary crashed down on her. The cold, indifferent authority I projected stripped her of her usual dramatic weapons. She turned on her heel and walked back into the elevator. The doors slid shut and she was gone. I let out a slow, cleansing breath. The apartment felt infinitely lighter. I had finalized the last necessary eviction of my life. An hour later, the private elevator chimed again. This time I smiled. The heavy doors opened, and my brother David walked in, carrying 3 large, greasy boxes from my favorite deep-dish pizza place. Right behind him was Naomi. She had traded her lethal courtroom suits for comfortable jeans and a cashmere sweater, holding a premium bottle of bourbon. This was a real celebration. "The conquering hero requires sustenance," David announced, setting the pizza boxes on the kitchen island and pulling me into a massive hug. "I saw the quarterly projections. You are absolutely terrifying, and I could not be prouder of you." Naomi set the bourbon on the counter and grabbed 3 crystal tumblers. She poured a generous measure into each glass, her eyes dancing with fierce affection. "The Vanguard bankruptcy proceedings officially closed at 4 o'clock today," Naomi reported, handing me a glass. "Diane and Richard's personal assets are currently being liquidated. Madison is working as a junior barista in a suburb 3 hours outside the city. The board is clear, Cassidy. The empire is entirely yours." I took the glass, looking at my brother and my sister-in-law. David had always been my steady supporter, quietly rebelling against our mother's toxic expectations. Naomi was the brilliant, unrelenting shield who had stood between me and a corporate firing squad. They did not care about the emerald gowns or the media headlines. They cared about me. They had rushed into the burning building when everyone else ran away. "To Apex," David said, raising his glass high. "To family," Naomi corrected softly, tapping her glass against his, then against mine. "The real kind." "To family," I echoed, taking a sip of the smooth bourbon. We spent the rest of the evening eating pizza on the sofa, laughing until our sides hurt, and planning the future of a company that was built on absolute integrity. I looked around my beautiful penthouse, surrounded by the only two people whose opinions truly mattered. I had lost a toxic mother and a parasitic employer, but I had gained the entire world. I had my boundaries, I had my empire, and I finally had the family I chose. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse long after David and Naomi had gone home. The Chicago skyline stretched out before me, a glittering grid of amber and silver lights, reflecting off the freezing dark waters of Lake Michigan. I pressed my palm against the cool glass, feeling the steady, vibrating hum of the city below. Down there, millions of people were setting their alarms for the morning, preparing to march into glass buildings and dedicate their waking hours to building someone else's dream. Just weeks ago, I was one of them. I was the person sacrificing sleep, peace, and personal joy to keep a dying empire afloat, falsely believing that my relentless dedication would eventually be rewarded with loyalty. I had bought into the greatest, most toxic corporate myth ever sold to the working class. The myth that if you just work hard enough, the people at the top will eventually see your value and treat you like family. But a corporation is not a family. A corporation is a machine designed to generate profit, and in the eyes of people like Diane and Richard, employees are nothing more than interchangeable gears in that machine. The moment you become a threat to their ego, or the moment they want to clear a path for their own unqualified bloodline, they will not hesitate to rip you out and throw you onto the pavement. They will look you dead in the eye, strip you of your dignity, and tell you that you were just a stepping stone. They will expect you to lower your head, accept your pathetic severance check, and quietly fade into obscurity. That is how the system is designed to work. It relies entirely on your fear. It relies on the assumption that you do not know how much power you actually hold. If there is one absolute, undeniable truth I have learned from this entire ordeal, it is that your value in the business world is not determined by how hard you work. Your value is determined by the leverage you possess. Hard work without legal protection is just voluntary exploitation. When I realized Vanguard Media was a sinking ship 5 years ago, I did not just work harder to save them. I worked smarter to protect myself. I formed Apex Solutions LLC. I secured the contracts under my own corporate entity. I created a legal fortress around my intellectual property. That was not an accident. That was a calculated survival strategy. I listened to the brilliant legal mind of my sister-in-law, Naomi, who taught me early on that handshakes and verbal promises are completely worthless when the millions start rolling in. If you are bringing in the revenue, you must own the architecture of your success. Put it in writing. Build the LLC. Own the data. Own your worth. We are conditioned by society to believe that our ultimate goal should be a corner office in a prestigious building. But true freedom is not sitting in a corner office that someone else can lock you out of. True freedom is owning the building itself. When Diane fired me in that lobby, she thought she was taking my power. She did not realize she was just giving me the legal clearance to completely sever her life support. The leverage was already there, quietly waiting in the dark, ready to be activated the second they tried to dispose of me. This lesson extends far beyond the boardroom. It applies just as brutally to the people we allow into our personal lives. We are taught that family is a permanent, unbreakable bond, a biological obligation we must honor regardless of the emotional cost. My mother, Patricia, weaponized that exact sentiment. She expected me to lay down my weapons, surrender my company, and let myself be destroyed, just so she could maintain her fragile illusion of high society status at a country club. She demanded that I set myself on fire to keep her social calendar warm. Walking away from her was the hardest and most liberating decision I have ever made. You do not owe your loyalty to people who view your boundaries as an inconvenience. You do not owe your success to people who only claim you when you are standing on top of the podium, but abandon you when you are fighting in the trenches. Family is not defined by shared DNA. Family is defined by the people who show up with water when your world is burning. David and Naomi are my family. Letting go of toxic relatives is not a loss. It is a necessary clearing of the emotional debris that prevents you from reaching your ultimate potential. When people betray you, when they try to steal your credit, humiliate you in public, or smear your name, the immediate instinct is to scream. The initial reaction is to fight them in the mud, to hurl insults, and to let your anger dictate your response. But rage without strategy is just noise. The most terrifying response you can give an enemy is absolute chilling silence, accompanied by flawless execution. True corporate karma is not a screaming match in a lobby. True karma is buying their debt while they are busy making fake videos. It is watching their fragile reality collapse while you stand perfectly still. Revenge is a dish best served cold, heavily documented, and backed by relentless corporate litigators. Let your success be the loudest sound in the room. Let your indifference to their suffering be the final blow to their ego. When you strip them of their power, do not stoop to their level. Just offer a polite, indifferent nod, step into your private elevator, and ascend to the empire you built with your own 2 hands. You are the architect, you are the foundation, and you are the ultimate authority over your own destiny. Have you ever been pushed out so someone's unqualified favorite could take your place? Did you fight back, or did you build your own empire? Share your stories in the comments below and hit subscribe for more stories of corporate karma. We are often taught that relentless hard work and blind loyalty will eventually be rewarded. Cassidy's journey shatters this dangerous myth, revealing a much harsher reality. Hard work without legal protection and leverage is simply voluntary exploitation. She poured her soul into saving her employer's failing company, working grueling hours, under the assumption that her dedication would secure her position. Instead, she was unceremoniously discarded in a public lobby the moment her presence became inconvenient for the CEO's wife, who wanted to hand the executive title to her unqualified daughter. The ultimate takeaway is that a corporation is not a family, it is a machine, and without leverage, even the most talented individuals are viewed as disposable. The most profound lesson to draw from this corporate battlefield is that your true value isn't defined merely by your daily output, but by the structural architecture of your success. Cassidy didn't just work hard, she worked smart by establishing her own independent company. She secured the massive tech contracts under her own LLC, ensuring that her intellectual property and revenue streams belonged strictly to her. When she was unjustly fired, she didn't need to scream or beg for her job. Her meticulous documentation, professional boundaries, and legal foresight became an impenetrable shield that allowed her to buy out the very people who tried to ruin her. This principle extends beautifully to our personal lives. We must learn to walk away from any environment, whether a toxic workplace or manipulative relatives, that demands our endless sacrifice without offering genuine respect. Have you ever had to build your own leverage to escape a toxic environment? And if so, how did you take your power back?